They say stories are harmless, words on a page, sounds in the air, nothing more. But what if a story isn't just told? What if it waits? What if it remembers you after the telling is done? Tonight, we open the door to 7 rooms. 7 tales whispered from the shadows born of grief, hunger, mirrors, silence, and things that should have stayed buried. Each one begins as something ordinary, something you could almost brush aside. But if you lean closer, if you let them in, you may find they lean back. You may tell yourself it's only a story, that none of this can touch you. But remember, every reflection needs an audience. Every echo needs a listener. And sometimes, when the last word has been spoken, the silence that follows isn't empty. So sit with us, listen carefully, and whatever you do, don't look away. Story 1. The Head Count. When I signed the lease for the penthouse, the realtor smiled in that tired, overly rehearsed way people do when they're trying to distract you from the dust in the corners or the creak in the floorboards. She said, "Most tenants don't last long up here. Too big, too drafty. The windows make the place cold at night." She didn't add the words too high or too lonely, though I could feel them resting between her sentences. The apartment itself seemed proud of its altitude. 15 floors up, the city looked less like a place where people lived and more like a board game someone had forgotten to finish. The street lamps below were scattered dots of amber. The traffic lights blinked in mute rhythm, and far in the distance the bridges over the river glowed like tired veins. The balcony was the crown jewel, an expanse of stone and rusted iron that jutted into the skyline. At night the wind pushed through its bars with a voice of its own, moaning and rattling like a throat too long unused. I told myself I had rented it for the view, for the quiet, for the chance to start over. The first night, I learned the truth of what the realtor had called drafts. The air moved constantly, whispering across the tall windows, nudging the blinds into faint rattles. The ceiling ticked as it cooled. The pipes groaned. The clock on the kitchen wall marked time with its pendulum like a metronome for the silence. Ordinary things, harmless. I fell asleep easily enough. It was at 3:07 when the sound came. A heavy, dull thud against the balcony floor. I woke with the clarity of a diver breaking the surface. No fading dream, no confusion, just a sound that didn't belong in the script of the night. My heart leapt, and I lay very still, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, listening. Silence followed. The wind gusted faintly through the glass, a thread of whistling that seemed to mock my sudden wakefulness. The city outside was motionless, a frozen portrait. I told myself it had been a pigeon, maybe, or something knocked loose by the wind, but the sound had been too heavy for that, too deliberate. Not a scatter, not a scrape, a drop, a landing. I checked the clock on my nightstand. 3:07. The red digits glowed like a small wound in the dark. I waited a long while, but no second sound came. Eventually I fell asleep again, though not easily. The second night, the same thing. Again at 3:07, the same heavy, dull impact on the balcony. One single thud, enough to make the glass of the window tremble in its frame, just faintly, enough to remind me that this was not accident but recurrence. I didn't sleep again after that. I lay awake until dawn painted the sky pale gray, the kind of color that makes the city look sickly, and I tried to convince myself that I had exaggerated, that the sound had not been as heavy, that perhaps the building itself shifted at the same hour each night. I went to work with the taste of metal in my mouth and shadows under my eyes. On the third night, I set an alarm for 3. I wanted to be awake, to hear it properly, to be sure. I sat in the dark with the blanket wrapped tight around me, watching the minutes bleed forward on the clock. At 3:06, the air in the room seemed to stiffen, as though the apartment itself were waiting. At 3:07, the sound came again. The thud, not loud, not echoing, but final. A sound with weight and certainty. I rose, slow and cautious, and padded barefoot across the cold floor toward the window. The glass breathed cold against my skin as I leaned near. The balcony was empty, only the pale stone glowing faintly in the streetlight below. Nothing out of place, no object fallen, no intruder crouching in the shadows, but I could still feel the echo of the sound in my bones. I stepped back, telling myself not to open the door, not to let the night air inside, and returned to bed with the strange sensation that the apartment itself had shifted around me, that I was no longer the one observing but the one being observed. On the fourth night, the thud came again, perfectly on schedule, and I knew with a kind of hollow dread that this was no accident. It was a pattern, and I was the only one keeping count. By the fifth night, I had given up the idea of sleep altogether, and though my body begged me to lie still, my nerves kept me perched at the edge of the bed, blanket drawn around my shoulders, eyes fixed on the clock as though the glowing digits themselves were a doorway through which the hour would arrive. The apartment had begun to feel less like a home and more like a waiting room, every board and every pane of glass holding its breath for the inevitable moment when the sound would come again. At 3:07, it came, but this time, not once. The first thud was the same, that heavy, dull landing, a weight meeting stone, a strike that belonged to flesh and gravity rather than wood or pipe. But then, a pause, short, deliberate, followed by a second thud, softer but just as final. Thud, thud, thud. I sat forward, my stomach lurching, my hands tightening on the blanket until the fabric twisted. It was no longer repetition, no longer accident. It was sequence. The next night confirmed it. At 3:07, the air stiffened again, the apartment tilting into its unnatural stillness, and the thud came once more. Not one, not two, three. Thud, 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 thud. Each impact seemed heavier than the last, not louder in volume but denser somehow, as though the sound pressed deeper into the floor, into my bones, leaving behind the ghost of pressure long after the air had gone still again. I could not bear to remain only a witness. I forced myself out of bed, heart racing, and padded to the window that overlooked the balcony. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, breath fogging the surface, eyes straining into the shadows. The stone balcony lay bare, no cracks, no scattered objects, no footprints in the thin dust that settled from the city air. But the sound had been there, had been real, and the silence after seemed only to mock me. I told myself that someone else must hear it, that I could not be the only one. The next morning, I found my courage in daylight, the thin armor of sun that poured through the windows. I rode the elevator down to the lower floors, found the neighbor 2 stories beneath me, a man in his 60s who smelled faintly of tobacco and wore the expression of someone who had lived in the building too long to be surprised by anything. I asked carefully at first whether he had heard anything strange in the nights. A knocking, a thud, something heavy from above. He frowned, shook his head, said, "At my age, I sleep through bombs." But no, nothing. Why? I laughed it off, some half-formed excuse about pipes and settling beams, and left him there in the hall, though his answer only deepened the hollow inside my chest. Later I asked the young couple across the corridor from me, people who worked late hours and returned long past midnight. Surely they must have noticed. But they only smiled, shrugged, said the building was quiet, quieter than most. Kia, that word clung to me like a curse, because my nights were anything but quiet. The next evening I sat waiting again, unable to resist the pull of the ritual, and when 3:07 struck, the sound came again, relentless in its certainty. 4 this time, 4 distinct thuds, one after another, each separated by the exact pause needed to make me count them. Thud, 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 thud. I whispered the numbers into the dark without meaning to, as though compelled, as though the sound itself needed me to mark its progress. My voice cracked on the last number, trembling, and when the silence returned, it seemed thicker than ever, as though the apartment held its breath, waiting for me to admit that I understood what was happening. It was not random. It was not accident. It was a count, and I was the one keeping it. In the morning I asked again, a different neighbor, a woman who lived directly below me. She shook her head with impatience, said she had slept perfectly well, no disturbances, no strange noises. She added almost sharply that if there was anything, it must be in my own unit, and I should perhaps have it inspected. But I knew what I had heard. Every night the sound grew longer, the numbers climbing as though some invisible tally were being marked into the stone of the balcony. Each thud was not merely a noise but an arrival, a presence slamming into the ground where no body stood. And as the days bled into nights, I began to dread not just the hour but the silence that followed, the long stretch of waiting where the weight of the unspoken hung in the air like smoke. No one else heard it. No one else believed. The count was mine alone. The count rose with each passing night, as inevitable as the tolling of the hour itself. By the seventh night it had reached 7, each thud distinct, each one heavier than the last, and the pauses between them stretched just long enough to force me to breathe, to recognize the number as it grew. I no longer bothered to sleep. I sat at the edge of my bed with the blankets twisted in my lap, staring at the clock, waiting for the digits to crawl to 3-7, knowing what was coming, knowing I would be unable to stop myself from listening. And when it came, when the first thud landed, my lips moved in tandem with the sound, whispering the numbers as though reciting a litany. 1, 2, 3. By the time the last impact rolled through the bones of the apartment, I was already trembling, my heart hammering with the certainty that the sequence was not only meant to be counted but demanded it, that if I ever refused to count, if I tried to ignore it, the silence that followed would break me in a way the sound never could. The days grew strange. I drifted through my work like a shadow, drinking coffee until my hands shook, staring at screens without focus. My coworkers asked if I was all right, if I was sleeping at all, and I lied automatically, nodding, brushing them off, guarding my secret like a wound. They could not help me. They could not hear it. They would only tell me what I already knew, that I was unraveling. It was late one evening, as I sat with my head on my desk long after the others had gone, that the phone rang. The number was familiar in a distant way. A coworker I had not spoken to in years, someone who had left the company quietly, almost without farewell. I answered with surprise heavy in my voice, but he did not bother with greetings, not with pleasantries, only a low, urgent question that made my blood freeze. "You're living in the penthouse, aren't you?" I stammered, asked how he knew, why it mattered, and his breath rasped down the line as he said, "I used to live there, only for a short while, long enough to know what you're hearing." My heart thudded against my ribs. You heard it too?" He did not laugh. He did not deny it. He simply said, "The balcony, the sound, every night, same time. It builds, doesn't it? 1, 2, 3, more, every night." I could not speak. My throat had closed, words locked inside me. He continued, voice hoarse, whispering as though the phone line itself could betray him. 14. That's where it stops. Always at 14. Because there were 14 of them. 14 who jumped. They always come back in order, one by one. Every night they return, and the floor remembers each of them. You'll hear it. You'll hear all 14. And then, he trailed off, silence stretching so long I thought the call had dropped. I forced the word out, my voice breaking. And then what? The line hissed faintly, static like breath, before he said, "Then it's your turn." The call ended. I sat frozen in the glow of the desk lamp, staring at the dead phone in my hand, the blood draining from my face. My chest rose and fell too fast, my breath shallow, my mind racing with images of bodies falling from the sky, of stone cracking beneath invisible weight, of heads striking the ground in sequence, each one marking its place in the count. That night I returned to the apartment with dread coiled in my gut like barbed wire. I did not want to hear it. I could not bear to hear it. Yet when the hour drew near, I found myself again at the window, forehead pressed to the glass, my reflection pale and hollow, eyes wide and unblinking. At 3-7 the first thud came. 1. The second followed. 2. The sequence marched forward, each impact like a heartbeat against the stone, each pause a demand for my attention. By the time it reached 7, my lips were moving again, whispering the numbers, tears streaking down my cheeks. 8, 9, 10, 11. The air in the room thickened, pressing against my skin, my lungs burning with the effort of drawing breath. 12, 13, and then, with a silence so heavy it seemed to crack the walls, the 14th, the final thud landed like a stone in my chest, reverberating through the bones of the building, through the marrow of my body. I staggered back from the window, clutching the frame, my knees weak. The silence that followed was not relief, but waiting, as though something had been completed, as though the count had reached its natural end and the only thing left was to begin again with something new. I stood trembling in the darkness, the glow of the clock burning into my vision. 3-7 had passed, but the night was not finished. The apartment was listening, the balcony was remembering, and I could feel the invisible weight of 14 shadows pressing against the glass, waiting for the 15th. waiting for me. The 14th thud had come and gone, leaving the room heavy with silence so thick it pressed against my ears like water. I had counted them without meaning to, whispering the numbers as though my lips belonged to someone else, as though the act of naming each one was the price of hearing them at all. When the 14th fell, the sound lingered in the bones of the apartment, a resonance deeper than any echo, and then there was nothing, only the hollow anticipation of what might come next. I told myself that would be the end of it. 14, just as he had said, the count complete. The cycle closed. I should have felt relief, but what settled over me instead was dread, sharp and metallic, the dread of knowing that something finished is only waiting for the next beginning. The silence was not peace. It was pause. I moved closer to the window, unable to stop myself. The balcony stretched beyond the glass, stone pale in the thin light of the city, its railings trembling faintly in the restless wind. I pressed my palms flat against the glass, searching for cracks, for signs that the structure had weakened. And in that moment I swore I felt the faintest tremor beneath my feet, as though the building itself had shivered. A sound followed, not the thud of weight, but a sharp, brittle snap, a sound like stone under strain. I froze, breath caught in my throat. The noise came again, faint but undeniable, the cracking of cement, the fracture of something once solid. The balcony was giving way, not in collapse, but in warning. The memory of weight was breaking it. My pulse thundered in my ears as I staggered back from the window. The apartment no longer felt like four walls and a roof. It felt like a throat, like I was standing in the hollow cavity of some enormous mouth that had been counting, one by one, and now had reached the point of hunger. I told myself not to listen, not to press my ear against the silence, but silence has its own gravity. It pulled me forward, drew me closer, until I realized I was leaning against the glass again, forehead touching the cold pane, breath fogging the surface. That was when I heard it. Not a thud, not a crack, a voice, soft, barely audible, yet clear as if whispered against the skin of my ear. Count 15. I jerked back, stumbling, my heel catching on the rug, nearly sending me sprawling to the floor. My hand pressed against my chest as though I could still feel the breath of the words against me, damp and intimate. My heart hammered so loud I thought it might wake the city below. But outside the windows, the world remained indifferent, the streets empty, the buildings silent. The clock read 3:09. 2 minutes past the ritual hour, yet the air in the apartment had not eased. It pressed tighter, thicker, filled with the certainty that the voice would come again, that the silence had only stepped aside to let me hear it. I whispered to myself that it wasn't real, that exhaustion had bent my senses, that I had imagined it. But even as the words left me, I knew they were lies. The sound had been too precise, too perfectly timed, too intimate to be illusion. Count 15. The phrase repeated itself in my mind, unbidden, until it no longer sounded like language but like a drumbeat. I paced the apartment, bare feet tracing paths into the floorboards, hands dragging along the walls as though I needed to feel their solidity, as though touch alone could anchor me to the real. But the walls felt softer than they should, the wood beneath my feet groaning with each step, the air too dense to breathe without effort. I stopped in the kitchen, staring at the clock, listening for the thud that didn't come. The cycle was broken now. The thuds had reached their end. The next sound would be something new, something meant for me. A gust of wind rattled the balcony door, shaking the frame, and for a moment I thought I saw movement, something dragging across the stone, slow and deliberate, something just beyond the edge of vision. I stepped closer, each footfall reluctant, each breath shallow, until I stood before the door, staring into the faint reflection of my face in the glass. The reflection shifted, not in movement, not in expression, but in presence. The reflection no longer felt like mine, but like a witness, as though something behind the glass was staring back through me, waiting for my acknowledgement. My lips moved without command, whispering into the still air, 14. And in answer, as though satisfied, the voice returned, closer now, closer than thought. Count 15. The words brushed the inside of my skull, seeping into me, echoing in my blood. I staggered back, hand pressed to my mouth, eyes wide with terror and something darker recognition. Because as much as I wanted to deny it, I understood now. The thuds were not accidents. They were returns. And the voice was not asking, It was instructing. The balcony groaned again, a long, low complaint of stone under burden, and I could hear in its fracture the memory of bodies, 14 in total, each one striking, each one remembered. The 15th had yet to come, and I knew with dreadful certainty who it was meant to be. The days that followed were no longer days in any true sense, only stretches of time that carried me unwilling toward the night. I went through the motions of waking, of working, of eating, but it was all in silence, a silence that belonged not to me but to the apartment, the kind that draped itself over my shoulders and followed me out into the city streets, reminding me with every breath that the hour would come again, that no matter how many footsteps I took away from the building, I would always return. At the office, voices blurred together, lips moving without sound, laughter and conversation thinning into the static hum of white noise. I barely remembered my tasks, my coworkers' faces, even my own name when it was spoken. All that mattered, all that existed, was the count. At first I tried to resist, to think of anything else, to let music fill my ears or conversations distract me, but the numbers bled through regardless, surfacing behind my eyes like stains that could not be scrubbed away. 1, 2, 3, whispered in rhythm with the beat of my pulse. 4, 5, 6, layered beneath the chatter of the streets. By the time I returned home each evening, the anticipation of the next thud had already hollowed me out. On the 12th night after the call, I no longer set alarms or sat waiting. I simply let the hour arrive, let the sound crash against the balcony as it always had. I did not count aloud this time, but the numbers spoke themselves inside me, unfurling in perfect order, claiming my thoughts as their own. Thud. 1. Thud thud. 2. The cycle unfurled with dreadful precision, and I realized then that my silence was irrelevant. I was no longer witness. I was vessel. When it reached 14, I held my breath, bracing for the silence, for the pause that had grown heavier with each passing night. And then it came the voice, closer than ever, not beyond the glass this time, but within me, as though my lungs themselves had shaped the words. Count 15. My knees buckled. I fell against the wall, clutching the plaster as though it could anchor me, but the numbers surged through my veins, my mind spinning with visions of bodies striking stone, of skulls cracking, of the balcony bowing under unseen weight. My mouth opened, not of my will, but of some greater compulsion, and I whispered the word that would complete the cycle. 15. The air shifted. The silence collapsed inward. The balcony groaned like a living thing. I do not remember moving toward the glass. I do not remember unlocking the door. I only remember the sudden cold of night air pressing against my skin, the city yawning far below, its lights swimming like drowned stars. The balcony stretched beneath me, trembling, fractured lines spider-webbing across its surface. I thought I saw shapes there, faint imprints, the shadows of knees and skulls, 14 marks carved into the stone by those who had come before. The 15th space lay empty. Waiting, I clutched the railing, knuckles white, breath ragged, eyes wide. The wind roared in my ears, carrying with it the faintest whispers, voices overlapping, merging, indistinct, yet united in their insistence. They did not beg, they did not plead, they commanded. Count 15. The world tilted beneath me. I stumbled back, collapsing onto the floor, crawling into the apartment as the door swung shut behind me with a force that rattled the glass. I lay there for hours, perhaps days, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster, the beats of my heart, the sounds in the pipes. Everything had become numbers, sequences, rhythms. When the sun rose, pale and indifferent, I found no comfort in its light, for the numbers remained. I could hear them even then, beneath the hum of traffic, beneath the chatter of neighbors who greeted me without suspicion. They had not heard the thuds. They had not felt the balcony quake. But I carried it all inside me now, the echo of every impact, the voice that had whispered, the word I had spoken. 15. That word followed me into sleep, into waking, into every moment in between. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the mirror and saw my lips moving, forming the number without sound, as though my body had taken the command to heart, as though I was rehearsing for something I could no longer refuse. The building, too, seemed to lean into it. The walls creaked at odd hours. The pipes knocked in patterns too deliberate to dismiss. Even the elevator paused between floors. lingering as though waiting for me to say the word again, to feed the cycle that had become my existence. I no longer asked if it was real. Reality had dissolved into counting, and whether I had heard the voice or created it mattered little. What mattered was that I could not stop. And sometimes, late at night, when exhaustion dragged me half under, I felt a warmth against the floorboards, a heaviness beneath the balcony stone, as though another body had struck, as though the 15th had already fallen, and I could not tell if it was me lying there or if I remained inside, listening. The line between witness and participant blurred, melted, vanished. All that remained was the whisper, "Count 15," and I did. Again and again, until the number lost its meaning, until it became a sound like breathing, until it was the only thing left of me. Story 2. The morgue's last call. It was the kind of night that only dispatchers know, the kind that stretches on in endless quiet, punctuated not by sirens or alarms, but by the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint hiss of wires carrying a silence too heavy for their circuits. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and paper, a mixture that no amount of cleaning ever erased, and the clock on the wall ticked in a rhythm that seemed determined to remind me just how slowly the hours passed when nothing was happening. I had worked the graveyard shift long enough to know its rhythms. You arrive while the city is still restless, its arteries clogged with late commuters and bar traffic, and for a while the phones keep you alive with their urgency. But by midnight, the noise fades. By 1, the city exhales. By 2, you are left with a hush that swallows the building, the kind of hush that presses at the glass of the windows and makes you aware of your own heartbeat. By 3, you are no longer sure if you are awake or dreaming with your eyes open. That night had been one of the latter. Calls had dwindled to nothing, not even the usual petty complaints, and I found myself watching the red light on the phone console as though sheer focus could force it to flicker. It did not. The silence held. The only movement was the second hand of the clock, making its thin journey around and around, like a hand trying to scratch its way out of the dark. I was half dozing at my desk, the headset resting just above my collarbone, when the line lit up. The jolt that went through me was sharper than caffeine, pulling me upright in an instant. I pressed the receiver to my ear, my voice steady with the practiced calm I had used 1,000 times before. 911. What's your emergency? What answered was not panic, not screaming, not even the usual heavy breathing of prank calls. It was static, a low, wet hiss that filled the line with the sound of distance itself, broken only by the occasional crackle, like an old radio barely tuned. I frowned, adjusted the headset, tried again. This is emergency services. Can you speak clearly? Do you need help? And then, through the static, a voice, a man's voice, old, worn thin with age and something worse, something like exhaustion stretched into eternity. It rasped as though dragging itself out of a throat too dry to carry words, breaking and reforming around syllables. I need water. I can't move. The hair rose on the back of my neck. The voice was faint but urgent, each word slurred as though pulled from somewhere very far away. Sir, stay calm. Can you tell me your location? My hands moved automatically over the console, ready to flag the call for tracing, the way training demanded. The static hissed, swallowed a few seconds, then spat him back. Water. Please. I can't move. The way he said it chilled me. Not just the words, but the tone. There was no background noise, no traffic, no movement, no sense of space. Just that voice, and the thick static that wrapped around it like a shroud. I tried again, sharper this time. Sir, listen carefully. We need to know where you are so we can send help. Look around. Do you see anything? A sign? A building? Static swallowed the answer. The silence on the line stretched long enough that I thought he was gone. Then, faintly, almost a groan. Phone. Payphone. I glanced at the screen, at the incoming call data. My pulse stumbled. The number displayed was unfamiliar, not tagged to any modern line, and the console flagged it in a way I had never seen before, marking it as unregistered. I requested a trace, fingers moving quick, and the system began its slow mechanical search. Sir, can you stay on the line with me? What is your name? The question was met with a sound that didn't quite qualify as an answer more. A sigh dragged into syllables, a wet groan that trembled into words. I can't Move. Please. Oh. My throat tightened. The voice sounded as though it was drowning without water, as though every word cost him more than the last. The console beeped. Trace complete. I looked at the screen, and my stomach sank. The call wasn't coming from a payphone on a street corner, not from a gas station or an old transit hub. The system's coordinates placed it 30 miles away, outside the city limits, in a part of the county I knew only by reputation, the old county morgue. It had been closed for nearly a decade, condemned. Its operations moved to a newer facility across town. The building was empty now, boarded up, left to rot in the damp fields that surrounded it. And yet, the call was coming from there. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry, and leaned back in my chair, as though distance from the console could undo what I had seen. My voice wavered despite my training, despite the 1,000 calls that had come before. Sir, I think I know where you are. You need to stay calm. We're sending someone. The line cracked, hissed, and the voice returned, thinner now, fraying at its edges. I need water. Please. Drawer. Locked. I froze. The word hit me like ice. Drawer. In a morgue, a drawer is not a desk. It is not a cabinet. It is steel, cold, and meant to hold what cannot move, what will never move again. The voice strained, broke into a rattle, then fell silent. The static hissed on. Sir? Sir? Can you hear me? My own voice echoed back at me in the headset, faint and distorted, as though the building itself had spoken it back. The call cut. The line went dead. The console light went dark, leaving only the hum of the fluorescence and the thudding of my own heartbeat in the silence. I sat frozen, staring at the coordinates on the screen, the words echoing in my skull. The drawer is locked. The console light had gone dark, the line severed clean, yet I sat there with the receiver pressed against my ear as though refusing to believe that silence could come so suddenly, so mercilessly. I told myself it was just another call dropped by interference, that the static had eaten the signal until there was nothing left, but the words clung to me like wet cloth. The drawer is locked, and the image refused to leave me. Cold metal, a body trapped inside, a voice somehow clawing its way out through circuits that should not have carried it. I forced myself into motion. Training demanded procedure, demanded rational action, and so my fingers found the keypad, dialing back the number displayed on the console. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pressed the call button, and I waited with the kind of desperation usually reserved for prayers. The line rang once, then cut. An automated voice, flat and unyielding, spoke into my ear. The number you have dialed is not in service. Please check the number and try again. I stared at the console, at the empty glow of the screen. Not in service. Impossible. I had just spoken to him. I tried again. Same result. Not in service. The screen flashed a warning now, a notice I had never seen before. Something about invalid routing, about a dead exchange. My hands trembled against the desk as I read it, as though the words themselves carried weight. Dead exchange. I leaned back in my chair, dragging my hands over my face, whispering to myself that there was an explanation. There had to be. Maybe the system was wrong. Maybe the coordinates had been a ghost entry. Maybe it had come from a spoofed number. But beneath the excuses, the truth gnawed at me. Numbers do not spoof themselves into morgues that have been closed for a decade. The clock on the wall ticked past 3:30. The silence pressed tighter, a silence no longer neutral but expectant, and I began to dread that the line might light up again. When it did, my body jolted as though struck. The console flared red, the light strobing against the dim office walls. My hands hovered above the receiver, reluctant, trembling. I forced myself to answer, voice steadier than I felt. 911. What's your emergency? Static roared. Not the faint hiss of before, but a dense wall of noise, a sea of broken signals crashing into my ear until I nearly tore the headset away. I gritted my teeth, adjusted the volume, tried to cut through it, and then through the storm his voice emerged. I need water. I can't move. The same words, the same cadence, each syllable dripping with effort, each pause longer than the last. Sir, listen to me, I said, my voice firm, commanding, though inside my chest my heart rattled like a trapped bird. We traced your call. We know where you are. Help is on the way. Stay calm. Can you hear me? The static swelled, swallowing my question whole. A groan bled through, low and guttural, as though dragged from somewhere deep within him. Then, again, I need water. I can't move. Exactly the same. Not a variation. Not even the faltering of a man trying to cling to consciousness. The same sentence, word for word, as though replayed from a recording. I felt my throat tighten. Sir, please, if you can tell me your name, we can. The static cracked. The voice split across the line, stuttering, repeating itself in fragments. I need water. I can't move. Water. Water. Please. The words looped and overlapped until they no longer sounded like words at all, but like the rattling of a machine stuck in place. And yet beneath it I could hear the human in them, the anguish, the desperation that was not mechanical but very much alive. My hands hovered over the console again, ready to flag the call, ready to escalate it, but the system froze. The tracing feature blinked and then returned with nothing. No coordinates, no source. The call was coming from nowhere. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay anchored, to stay calm. Sir, stay with me. I need you to focus. Where exactly are you? You said the drawer is locked. Which drawer? Can you describe it? The static hissed. A long pause. And then, faint as breath-fogging glass, the same phrase again. I need water. I can't move. I whispered to myself now, repeating his words before he could, hearing them before they left his lips. I need water. I can't move. They had etched themselves into me, burrowed into the rhythm of my thoughts. I clutched the desk with both hands to stop them from shaking. The voice grew louder, suddenly, sharply, like a man gasping at the surface after drowning. Water. I can't move. I flinched, yanking the headset slightly away, my breath catching in my throat. The sound rattled the office, filled the silence until I could no longer hear the clock on the wall, until the hum of the fluorescence vanished, leaving only his words ringing in my skull. And then, just as suddenly, the line went dead again. The silence that followed was worse than the noise, worse than the repetition, worse than anything I had felt before, because now I knew it wasn't just a call. It was insistence. It was something that would not stop. I sat there trembling, staring at the blank screen of the console, whispering under my breath the words I knew I would hear again. I need water. I can't move. The phone had gone silent again, but silence no longer felt like silence. It felt like waiting. It felt like the space between breaths, the pause before something inevitable. I sat at my console with my hands pressed flat against the desk, eyes locked on the dark screen, and every nerve in me pulled tight with the certainty that it would ring again. The quiet of the office was no longer the harmless hush of an empty shift. It was a pressure, an atmosphere too dense to breathe. When the light flared red again, I didn't startle this time. I simply stared, frozen, as though the light had always been there, and I had only just noticed it. My hand rose slowly, almost unwillingly, and I pressed the receiver to my ear. 911, what's your emergency? The static was softer this time, thinner, as if the storm of noise had retreated, leaving only its residue behind. The man's voice came through clearer, though it was still torn by pauses, as if words had to fight their way out of him. I need water. I can't move. I closed my eyes, the phrase carving itself into the inside of my skull. My lips moved with it, silently, in sync. I was no longer responding as a dispatcher. I was responding as something caught in the rhythm of the words. But I forced myself to lean forward, to break the trance. My fingers moved over the console, initiating a trace, commanding the system to give me coordinates no matter how impossible. Sir, listen to me, I said firmly, though my voice was thinner than I wanted. You said you can't move. You said you need water. Tell me where you are. Tell me something I can use. There was a sound then, not static, not voice, something metallic, faint but distinct, a scrape followed by a hollow clang, as though metal had been struck from inside. Then his voice again, changing now, shifting, not the same sentence repeated but something new. The drawer is locked. The words were ragged but precise, pulled from him like teeth. The sound of them made my skin crawl, because I knew that tone, not a metaphor, not a slip of the tongue. He meant it. A morgue drawer. The console beeped. Trace complete. I turned my eyes to the screen, and this time there was no ambiguity, no failure, no invalid routing. The coordinates were precise, pinning themselves on a map I knew too well. The county morgue. The old one. 30 miles away. Condemned. Abandoned for 10 years. The screen even supplied the building code, its last recorded designation before the system had archived it. Facility 17. Morgue. My throat tightened. My hands shook so hard I could barely keep them on the keys. "Sir," I whispered, though the formality of my role had shattered. "You're not supposed to be there. That place is closed. That place has been closed for years." The voice rasped, the sound of him closer now, less buried in static. "The drawer is locked." I felt the blood drain from my face. My mind conjured it without permission. The cold metal drawer of a morgue, the kind I had only seen in training manuals and films. Its steel face marked with a number, its handle waiting to be pulled. Inside, a body, tagged, wrapped, silent. The man's voice did not belong to someone standing in a building. It belonged to someone lying in one of those drawers. I tried to think logically, tried to remind myself of what was possible. Perhaps the call was a hoax. Perhaps someone had broken into the morgue, found a way to connect a line. Perhaps. But the weight in my chest told me the truth was something else entirely. The sound came again, metal against metal. A deep, hollow clang, muffled but undeniable, as though something within a confined space had struck the walls. "Sir, listen carefully," I said, the words trembling. "Stay calm. Stay with me." "We're going to," he interrupted me, his voice straining, sharper now, louder, words dragged up from the bottom of his lungs. "The drawer is locked. Please, please." The last word broke into a sob, a sound so raw it pierced through the static, through the wires, straight into me. I slammed the alert key, trying to connect with local authorities, trying to send anyone, someone, to the coordinates. But the system rejected it. A message appeared across my screen. "Facility, not active. Response disabled." It was as though the network itself had forgotten the morgue existed, or worse, refused to acknowledge it. The voice filled the line again, no longer faint, no longer distant, but pressed close, as though his lips were against the receiver. They didn't check. I was breathing. I was alive. The drawer, locked. My chest tightened. My pulse raced. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed louder, as though even the building leaned closer to listen. "Who are you?" I whispered. Static surged, then thinned. His answer came in a whisper so close it chilled the shell of my ear. "You already know." The line went dead. The console light extinguished. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a silence with weight, with presence, as though the morgue itself had leaned across 30 miles of dead air and pressed its breath against the room where I sat, waiting for me to admit that I had heard him, that I had understood. And deep in that silence, I thought I heard it again, metal striking from the inside. Clang. 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 The drawer. Locked. The silence that followed his last words was not a silence I had ever known before. It was not the silence of an empty night shift, nor the hush of a sleeping city, nor even the sterile pause of dropped connection. This silence had density. It seemed to thrum against the glass of the dispatch booth, to press into the floor beneath my chair, to seep through the receiver into the skin of my ear. I sat rigid, headset still clamped tight, unable to breathe, waiting for what I already knew would come next. And then it did. The sound arrived like a hammer inside a coffin. Sudden, jarring, metallic. A deep clang that reverberated through the line, shaking me to my bones. My head jerked involuntarily, the receiver trembling in my hand. Another clang followed, louder, then another. Clang, clang, clang. Each strike rattled the metal frame of the morgue drawer, as though it were being pounded from within. Each blow carrying the weight of fists that should not have been moving, of bones that should not have had the strength to rise. My breath caught, my pulse thundering in my ears. But before I could speak, before I could try to command the voice to calm, the man's words broke through. No longer rasping, no longer faltering, but sharp, clear, and disturbingly steady. They didn't check my pulse. The sound of him was different now. The weakness had gone, stripped away like skin peeled from bone, leaving only clarity. There was no plea left, no helplessness, only accusation. His voice rang with the finality of someone who had passed beyond need. Clang. The drawer is locked. Clang. They closed it on me. The clangs grew faster, more violent, each one louder than the last, as though the metal walls were being battered from every side, as though whatever lay inside had found its rhythm and meant to break free. I pressed my palms hard into the desk to steady myself, but the vibration of the sounds seemed to travel through the wires into the furniture, into the air itself. I could feel the strikes reverberating inside my ribs, making it impossible to distinguish where the sound ended and my own body began. I forced my voice to work, though it came out broken, trembling. "Sir, you need to stay calm. We're trying to get help to you. He cut me off, his words slicing clean across mine. "There is no help. There never was." The tone made my blood run cold. It was not desperation. It was not hope. It was the voice of someone who had accepted something terrible and now wanted me to accept it too. I whispered almost to myself, "Who are you?" The clang stopped. Silence filled the line, humming, swelling, alive. When the man spoke again, his voice was steady, low, and unmistakably alive in a way that chilled me deeper than any groan or gasp could have. "I was the last they put in here. They rolled me into the steel. They tagged me like the rest. But I was still warm. I was still breathing. I screamed, but the walls swallowed me. And then the dark came, and the air left, and I counted the seconds until there was no more to count. I pressed a hand against my mouth, fighting the urge to tear the headset away. The words poured into me like liquid ice, filling me with images I could not shake. The narrow metal drawer, the cold walls closing in. A man's voice muffled until it broke, unheard, and then he said the words that hollowed me out completely. "But now, I am standing." The static crackled faintly, punctuating the declaration. My skin prickled, my heart lurched, and I realized that he no longer sounded buried, no longer sounded confined. His voice no longer carried the muffled edges of someone speaking through metal. It rang sharp, crisp, as though he had stepped out of the drawer and stood in an open room. I whispered, trembling, "That's impossible." His laugh was dry, brittle, a sound without mirth. So was the phone. The line hummed with silence again, but it was not empty. I could hear faint echoes around him now, shuffling, scraping, the soft complaint of hinges long unused. I could hear space. He was moving. I slammed the trace key again, desperate for the coordinates, and the system confirmed what I already knew. The call was still coming from Facility Hasson 7, the old morgue. But the locator detail shifted slightly, no longer fixed. It showed motion, movement inside the building. He was walking. I pressed the receiver tighter to my ear, my whisper hoarse, broken. "What do you want from me?" The answer came instantly, calm and cold. "You answered." And then, beneath his voice, faint but rising, another sound. Not one clang, not one drawer, but many. The ringing of metal handles, the hollow thump of doors straining, the rattle of steel on steel as though dozens of drawers had begun to tremble in unison, all stirred awake by his return. The voice on the line cut through them, clear and sharp. "They're listening too." I tore the headset from my ear and flung it onto the desk, staggering back, chest heaving. Yet even without it, I could still hear the sound, faint but unmistakable, as though it had bled into the room itself, the banging of drawers, the metallic chorus of fists against steel, the dead made restless by the call. And over it all, his voice, steady, cold, almost triumphant. "I told you, the drawer was locked, but I'm not in it anymore." The chorus of drawers faded one by one, their clanging subsiding into the silence like waves retreating from a shore, until only the low hum of the empty line remained. I stood hunched over the console, the headset lying where I had flung it, its coiled cord writhing on the desk like something alive. My chest rose and fell too quickly, my hands clutching the edge of the table as though letting go would send me collapsing to the floor. For a moment, I believed it was over. The line was dead. The noise had gone. The morgue, 30 miles away, had swallowed itself back into silence. But silence, I had learned, was never truly empty. It was a pause, a breath before the next strike. I forced myself to breathe, to gather what remained of my training. Procedure demanded I log the call, document the trace, Submit the coordinates. Procedure demanded I report the malfunction, but when I reached for the console keys, I realized my fingers would not obey. They trembled too violently, hovering over the keys like birds afraid to land. My eyes fixed on the blank screen, waiting for it to flare red again, waiting for the light that had become more inevitable than sunrise. It did not come. Not yet. The clock ticked past 4. The fluorescent lights above hummed with their endless monotone, a sound I had long since ceased to hear until it was the only thing left. My body sagged in the chair, exhaustion pressing down heavier than fear, and I told myself I had imagined it, all of it, that fatigue had warped the shape of the night. But then I remembered the words, as sharp as glass. I told you, the drawer was locked, but I'm not in it anymore. I rose to my feet, unsteady, pacing the length of the small dispatch booth. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened window, pale and distorted, its mouth moving in time with mine as I whispered his sentences under my breath. I need water. I can't move. The drawer is locked. They didn't check my pulse, over and over until the words lost meaning, until they became nothing more than rhythm, as if my mind had been bent into his echo chamber. That was when the sound came, not the faint hiss of static through the headset, not the metallic clang of drawers, but something far more familiar, far more real, the shrill, unmistakable ring of the office phone. Not the console line, not the headset, the physical phone on the desk beside me, the one used only for internal calls. I froze, staring at it, its beige plastic body vibrating with each scream of its bell. The sound was sharp, insistent, cutting through the stale air of the room like a blade. My mouth went dry. My hand hovered above it, unwilling to touch, unwilling to answer, but the ringing drilled into me, louder with each repetition, until the room itself seemed to shake with its demand. Finally, trembling, I lifted the receiver. The sound that filled my ear was not silence. It was not static. It was breathing, heavy, damp, slow, and then the voice, no longer strained, no longer buried in distortion, clear now, sharp, with a weight that pressed directly into me. They didn't check my pulse. I staggered back, the receiver clutched tight in my hand. Who is this? I whispered, though I already knew. The breath thickened, deepened, curling like fog into my ear. I hear the bell, and then, as if on cue, the office phone itself rang again, violently, the sound exploding against my ear though I was already holding the receiver. The line shrieked in my hand, a noise so piercing I nearly dropped it, and yet beneath the ringing, beneath the shrill assault, the voice pressed close, closer than sound, closer than thought. They got out. The ringing stopped. The line went dead, but the room was not empty. The air shifted, heavy, charged, as though someone had entered unseen. The fluorescent lights flickered once, twice, before steadying. My reflection in the dark window seemed no longer to match my movements, its mouth still whispering even as mine hung open in stunned silence. I placed the receiver back in its cradle, my hand slow, deliberate, as though any sudden motion might draw attention from whatever else was in the room. My pulse throbbed in my throat, my breath shallow, every sound magnified to agony. Behind me, the console sat silent. No lights, no calls, but I knew it was not finished. Because the morgue's last call was not the last at all. It was only the first. Story 3. The seventh statue. Some obsessions don't arrive with a sudden spark. They seep in quietly, like rainwater finding cracks in old stone, until the walls of your mind are damp and heavy, and you realize too late that something has been living inside you for far longer than you intended. For Marcus, the photographer, it began with a single shot, one frame captured on a whim, a gargoyle perched high above St. Bartholomew's Cathedral in the oldest quarter of the city. The first night he saw it, the light had already gone soft, the sky bruised with purples and ash-colored clouds. He had been walking home from an assignment, his camera still slung across his shoulder, when the shape caught his eye. It was not unusual for cathedrals to have grotesques, their open mouths forever gaping to ward off spirits or funnel rain, but this one seemed different. Its head was cocked at an odd angle, not outward toward the city as the others were, but tilted down, as though it were studying the street, its eyes fixed not on the cobblestones or the crowd, but directly on him. He raised the camera almost without thought and pressed the shutter. The sound was sharp in the quiet street, a metallic click that seemed to ripple against the stone walls. He took another, then another, zooming in as far as the lens would allow, though the distance and height blurred the details. Still, when he lowered the camera, the sensation lingered, the feeling of having been watched and returned. That was how it began. He told himself it was nothing, that he had merely stumbled across a subject worth exploring, a project to fill the empty nights since his divorce. But in truth, the gargoyle had taken root in him from the start, its wings of weathered stone folded tight, its face obscured by centuries of soot, and yet its posture undeniable. It was not guarding the cathedral. It was waiting. So Marcus returned, the next night, and the one after, each time carrying his tripod, his lenses, the battered satchel heavy against his hip. He learned the rhythm of the cathedral bells, the hush of the square after the last cafe closed, the way the air smelled faintly of iron when the fog rolled in from the river. He would set up across the street, frame the roofline, and wait for the long exposures to burn the details into his memory card. At first it was simply documentation. He counted the grotesques one by one, their hunched bodies frozen in their appointed places. 6 in total. One at the north corner, wings spread wide. One crouched above the arch, its mouth twisted into a silent scream. One with a beak-like snout, leaning forward into the void. Another whose face had worn away entirely, leaving only the outline of horns. And 2 more, less distinct, but still unmistakable guardians, their claws gripping the parapet as though they had been clinging there for centuries. 6, always 6. He whispered the number aloud some nights, as though to reassure himself. The camera confirmed it. 6 statues. 6 grotesques. 6 watchers. And yet, reassurance never came, because the more he studied them, the less certain he became of their stillness. The angles were wrong sometimes, their shadows shifting subtly from one night to the next. One seemed to turn its head a fraction, another to tilt forward as though straining closer to the lens. It was not proof. The human eye is unreliable, and the mind craves patterns. He told himself this every night as he returned home to his small apartment, uploading the photographs, enlarging them until the pixels broke apart, searching for evidence that never quite appeared. But he felt it anyway, that sense of gradual approach, of stone that leaned toward him while the rest of the city slept. He began to dream of them. Dreams where the cathedral loomed taller than the skyline, where the gargoyles unfurled wings that blocked out the moon, where he lifted his camera only to find that the lens showed nothing but his own reflection. He would wake in sweat, heart pounding, stumble to the computer, and open the folder of images just to reassure himself that they were still stone, still silent, still 6. 6. He clung to that number like a lifeline. On the 7th night, he stood in the square once more, his tripod legs biting into the cobblestones, the cold seeping through his gloves. He adjusted the focus, exhaled into the air that steamed white, and counted them again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The click of the shutter echoed against the empty windows. He lowered the camera and stared up at the roofline, waiting for the certainty that never came. The gargoyle he had first noticed seemed nearer now, its head tilted lower, its gaze more deliberate. He rubbed his eyes, tried again, counted once more. 6, always 6. But that night, for the first time, he felt the number slipping, as though something unseen was waiting to be named. Marcus had always believed in the honesty of the camera. Human eyes could lie, could misinterpret, could be deceived by shadows and fatigue. But the camera captured truth, or at least a fragment of it, unvarnished by perception. That was why he kept coming back, night after night, framing the roofline again, pressing the shutter again, cataloging each change no matter how small. He wanted proof. By the second week, the proof began to surface. It was subtle at first, so subtle he might have dismissed it if not for the persistence of his own unease. One of the gargoyles, the horned one whose face had mostly eroded, seemed to lean forward further than it had before. In one frame, its silhouette rose above the parapet. In the next, it seemed to crouch lower, its claws gripping stone as though preparing to leap. He overlaid the images, pixel against pixel, but the shift was undeniable. A trick of the lens, he told himself. A mistaken angle. The tripod had slipped. The wind had moved the camera. Anything but what it appeared to be. And yet, the feeling grew. Another night, the beaked grotesque no longer pointed outward into the city but angled slightly toward the square, toward him. Its posture was almost inquisitive, its shadow reaching further across the roofline, as though leaning closer to catch his breath on the cold air. By the 10th night, Marcus could no longer convince himself it was coincidence. The statues were moving. Not quickly, not enough to catch in real time, but gradually, incrementally, with each passing night. Stone did not shift that way, not unless it was being shaped by hands, but there were no scaffolds, no restorations underway, no sign of tampering, only the quiet certainty of the images. He stopped telling himself he was imagining it. He began, instead, to wait for it. Some nights he stayed longer, past midnight, until the fog thickened and the square emptied of even stray footsteps. He would sit on the edge of the fountain, camera in hand, staring upward at the row of grotesques, etched black against the bruised sky. He never saw them move, not once, but when he lowered his gaze to the display, the difference was there. One crouched lower, another angled its head. The horned one seemed to bend closer, its horns cutting a sharper outline against the clouds. He told no one. Not his colleagues, not the few acquaintances who still checked in on him from time to time, not even the strangers on the photography forums he frequented. The obsession had become private, sacred in its own way, a dialogue between himself and the stone. Then came the night of the count. Marcus had returned as always, the cathedral bells marking the hour with hollow weight. He counted them, one by one, as he always did. 6, always 6. His lips formed the number softly, like a ritual. 6 guardians, 6 witnesses. The camera clicked. The image burned into the sensor, but when he checked the frame, the rhythm faltered. There were 7 figures etched in black across the parapet, 7 grotesques leaning into the sky. His breath caught. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, checked again. Perhaps it was a trick of the exposure, a shadow misread, a play of fog against the spires. But no, the shapes were clear, distinct. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And there on the far edge of the roofline stood a 7th. It was not like the others. The familiar grotesques were warped, monstrous, wings and claws and twisted mouths. This one was different. Its form was slender, more human in posture, its outline sharp against the backdrop of the cathedral's tower. Its head was tilted down, just as the first gargoyle had been the night Marcus discovered it. Its gaze cast not outward but directly toward him. He zoomed in, hands trembling, the lens struggling to hold focus at that distance. The details swam, blurred, then resolved just enough to suggest what his heart already feared. The 7th figure was not a grotesque at all. It was a woman. His pulse hammered in his throat. He stepped back from the tripod, nearly stumbling against the fountain's rim, his eyes fixed on the roofline. 6, he whispered aloud. Desperate. 6. There should only be 6, but the camera did not lie. The 7th statue was there. When he looked again, lifting his gaze from the camera to the cathedral itself, there were only 6. The line of grotesques was unchanged, their hunched bodies outlined against the clouds, their stone wings folded. 6, no more. But when he returned to the image, there it was again, the 7th, silent, waiting. Marcus did not sleep that night. He sat hunched at his desk, the glow of the monitor bleaching his face into a mask, the photos arrayed across the screen in a grim progression. 6, always 6, until now, until the 7th. He clicked back and forth between frames, dragging the slider, zooming, cropping. His heart thudded painfully with each new detail revealed, and yet he could not stop himself. The 7th figure was unmistakable, no matter how much he tried to rationalize the distortion of light, the quirks of digital grain. It was not stone. It was her, his ex-wife, Julia. At first, the resemblance seemed impossible, a cruel coincidence. But the more he stared, the more the certainty rooted itself. The slope of her shoulders, the line of her jaw, the tilt of her head, he knew them all too well. He had photographed her countless times during their years together, on beaches, in gardens, at the cafe where she used to laugh behind the steam of her coffee. His camera had memorized her long before his mind could admit it. And there was the necklace. Even through the blur of the zoomed frame, he could see it. a delicate silver chain with a pendant shaped like a teardrop of glass. She had worn it on the day they met, and again on the day she walked away, the same fragile shimmer resting against her collarbone. Marcus leaned closer to the screen until his breath fogged the glass. "No," he whispered, voice shaking. "This isn't possible." But the photo did not change. The seventh statue gazed down at him, Julia's likeness carved in shadow and grain. The nights that followed blurred together, each one thick with anticipation and dread. Marcus returned to the square without fail, his tripod biting into the stones, his fingers numb from the cold. He photographed the gargoyles again and again, chasing proof, desperate to trap the truth in pixels. Each time, the seventh statue appeared. Each time, it was Julia, but the details sharpened. Her face no longer half-formed in shadow, but clear, unmistakable. The curve of her lips, the fall of her hair, though rendered in stone. The pendant gleaming faintly, catching a stray beam of moonlight. And worse, her posture shifted, night by night, closer to him. At first, she stood among the grotesques, still, statuesque, merely another figure upon the roofline. Then her head tilted lower, her gaze locked onto the lens. Then her hands, once folded at her sides, began to lift, fingers curling as though testing the air. Marcus's chest grew tight as he scrolled through the series, image after image. She was not simply there. She was moving, and then came the frame he could not explain. It was on the 23rd night. He had taken his shots, packed his bag, returned home to the hum of his radiator, and the stale smell of coffee left too long on the burner. He uploaded the files as usual, his eyes heavy, his hands mechanical, and then he opened the last photograph, enlarged it, and saw what should never have been possible. Julia, no. The seventh statue was looking directly at the camera, not toward it, not angled vaguely in its direction. Her eyes were locked on the lens with a precision no trick of perspective could fake, and in that frozen instant, as the pixels resolved, her eyelids fluttered. It was not a blur, not an artifact of motion. It was deliberate. She had blinked. Marcus slammed back from the desk, the chair skittering across the floor. His hands clutched at his scalp as though to tear the vision free from his mind. But when he returned to the screen, the truth was still there. Her left eye, closed mid-blink, lashes frozen mid-motion. The photo had caught her moving. Stone does not blink. Statues do not change. Yet there it was, proof undeniable, captured by the very device he had once trusted to protect him from illusion. His breath came in ragged gasps. He turned off the monitor, but in the black glass of the screen he saw her face lingering, pale and patient. He pressed his palms against his eyes, but behind the darkness, the image remained. When at last he stumbled to bed, dawn bleeding pale light into the sky, he could not sleep. For every time he closed his eyes, he saw hers closing too, the seventh statue watching him from across the distance, more alive in memory than she had ever been in life. And when he rose, bleary and trembling, to pour water into the sink, he caught himself whispering into the empty room, "Why did you blink?" Marcus had never been so afraid of his own camera. It sat in the corner of the apartment now, lens cap on, power switched off, but he could feel it all the same, as though the device remembered too much, as though the glass still held her gaze. He avoided it for a day, then two, but the pressure inside him grew unbearable. Obsession is not something you set aside. It claws, it gnaws, it consumes. By the third night, he was back at the square. The cathedral loomed like a sentinel above him, its roofline etched black against a swollen moon. The gargoyles crouched in their appointed places, motionless, eternal. 6 of them, always 6. He lifted his eyes again and again, counting as though repetition might force certainty into his bones. But when the camera clicked, when the shutter split the night, the number shifted. 7. On the display, there she was, Julia, or the thing that wore her shape, standing among the grotesques as though she had always belonged. Her head tilted toward him, her eyes patient, her lips curved into the faint suggestion of a smile. Marcus swallowed hard, a cold weight pressing against his lungs. He should have turned, should have walked away, should have smashed the camera on the stones. But his feet remained planted, his hands adjusting the focus as though under command. The lens extended, the image sharpened, and the seventh statue leaned closer, her posture no longer quite stone, no longer quite still. Then, impossibly, he heard her. Not a hallucination, not memory. A voice, soft as the whisper of wind through broken glass, curling downward from the cathedral roof and winding into his ear. Marcus. The sound staggered him. He nearly dropped the camera, his name echoing inside his skull with the precision of a knife. It was her voice, not the harshness of stone grinding, not some monstrous groan, but Julia's, warm and intimate, the voice he had once heard in the dark, before sleep. His chest tightened, his eyes filled. "No," he breathed, shaking his head, yet his hands lifted the camera again. The lens trembled in his grip, his pulse hammering in his temples, but he could not resist. He needed to see her again, needed proof that the voice was not his unraveling mind. The shutter cracked. In the frame, she was closer still. Her stone features softened into something perilously close to flesh. Her necklace glimmered faintly, as though it caught more than moonlight. And behind her, the grotesques seemed to recoil, their mouths wider, their claws digging deeper into the parapet, as though they feared her presence among them. Marcus whispered hoarsely, "Why are you here?" The answer came not through the camera, but through the air itself, vibrating along the cathedral walls, threading through the silence of the square. "You left me." The words were heavy, layered, as though spoken from behind centuries of stone. His legs weakened beneath him, his breath shallow. He remembered the last day, the slammed door, the pendant catching sunlight as she walked away, the silence after. He had not followed. He had let her go, and now she stood above him, resurrected in limestone and shadow, her reproach eternal. The voice deepened, cracked like stone under strain. "You left me, so I came higher." A sound followed then, a sound Marcus would never forget, no matter how long he lived. The groan of stone under pressure, the faint splintering as cracks spider-webbed outward. It rolled through the square like thunder, a vibration he felt in his bones, the language of things that should never move. He stared upward in horror as flakes of mortar sifted down, catching in the lamplight like snow. One of the grotesques shifted, a claw jerking subtly, a horn fracturing. The seventh statue leaned forward, her feet grinding against the roof, chips of stone cascading. Marcus stumbled back, colliding with the edge of the fountain, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His camera dangled from its strap, forgotten, as the figure continued to move. Not fast, not natural, but with a dreadful inevitability, each shift accompanied by the sickening crack of stone tearing away from itself. Her head turned fully now, her gaze no longer fixed but following him, tracking his retreat across the square. The sound was unbearable, grating, resonant, the intimate scream of rock forced into motion after centuries of stillness. "Now," she whispered, her voice both above and behind him, filling the space as though the entire cathedral had spoken. "I have a better view." Marcus clamped his hands to his ears, but the sound was not in his ears. It was inside him. The seventh statue lifted 1 foot from the parapet, stone shattered, spraying shards across the roofline, the gargoyles shuddering as though to flee. The groan of the cathedral deepened, wood and mortar straining, the air filled with dust and fragments. And Marcus, choking on the stone-scented air, realized with perfect clarity that she was no longer content to remain above him. She was stepping down. Marcus ran. The fountain blurred past him, the cobblestones rising like obstacles beneath his frantic steps, the straps of his camera slapping hard against his chest. His breath tore raggedly in and out, echoing across the empty square. Yet every gasp only filled his lungs with more of that choking dust, the sharp grit of stone, the ancient scent of mortar breaking apart. Behind him, the groan of the cathedral followed, a sound too massive to belong to architecture, a sound alive with movement, the crack of splintering stone, the thunder of dislodged fragments raining from impossible heights. It was not a building anymore. It was breathing. He dared a glance over his shoulder. The gargoyles had not shifted, not truly, but they looked different now. Their gaping mouths stretched wider, their claws gripped tighter, as though recoiling from the figure among them. And there she was, the seventh statue leaning forward, her neck extended, her eyes locked on him across the distance. "Julia." Her mouth moved. He did not hear words. Not yet. Only the vibration, the suggestion of speech carved into the night. He stumbled, caught himself, pushed forward into the narrow street that led away from the square. His shoes struck sparks against the stone, his body screaming for rest, but fear drove him harder. He would not stop. He would not look back. He told himself he was escaping. Yet with every step, the sound followed. The cracking, the grinding, the dragging of stone across stone. The cathedral's shadow seemed to stretch after him, curling into every alley, pressing against every wall. And then, the whisper, closer than before, not high above, not carried on the wind, but right behind him, threaded into his ear. "You left me." Marcus nearly fell again, his legs folding, but terror forced him upright. He reached the end of the street, turned sharply into another, then another, desperate to lose the square, to lose the cathedral, to lose the memory of her face gazing down at him with stone-cold recognition. But the city had changed. The streets no longer matched what he knew. The turns bent wrong. The alleys narrowed into impossible angles. Windows stared at him like hollow sockets. He ran without destination, guided only by the pounding of his heart and the certainty that if he stopped, she would be there. At last, his flight slowed. His lungs burned. His vision swam. And then he saw it. A shop front window darkened, its glass pane smeared with grime but reflective enough to catch his shadow. He staggered toward it, pressing one hand against the glass to steady himself, his breath fogging its surface. He looked up, and his stomach fell into emptiness. The reflection was not his own. In the dim sheen of the window, he stood tall, rigid, unmoving, his skin pale, his features stiff, his mouth slackened into silence. The hand that pressed against the glass was no longer flesh, but stone veined with cracks, mottled with the roughness of carved granite. He lurched back, staring down at his hand, desperate to deny. But in the world outside the glass, his flesh was still flesh, trembling, sweating. Only in the reflection did the truth appear. Marcus was already frozen, his likeness carved beside hers. His voice broke in a hoarse sob. "No, no, please." The reflection did not echo his words. Instead, its mouth curved into the faintest of smiles, its eyes turning slowly toward the edge of the frame toward her. And she was there. Julia, the seventh statue, no longer upon the cathedral but standing within the reflection itself, her stone form leaning close, her pendant gleaming faintly as though lit from within. She raised one hand, brushing her fingers along his stone shoulder with the intimacy of a lover. The window shuddered with the sound of cracking, stone grinding against stone. Marcus staggered backward, clutching his ears. But the sound was not in the glass, not in the air. It was inside him, resonating from bone to marrow. And then, clear as a whisper pressed against his skull, came her words. "Now I have a better view." The reflection held a moment longer, his stone face locked beside hers, both staring outward through the glass into the empty street. Then the street went silent. Marcus found himself standing alone, breath shallow, hands trembling. The window reflected nothing now but darkness. The gargoyles were gone. The cathedral was nowhere to be seen. And yet, as he stumbled away into the twisting alleys of the city, he could feel the weight in his chest, the heaviness of stone filling his lungs, the stiffness of stone creeping along his limbs. He did not look back again, for he knew that if he did, if he dared, he would see the statue standing there, seven now, always seven, his own form forever beside hers, both gazing down with unblinking eyes, watching, waiting. Story 4. The Guest Beneath. The old house had been standing for over a century, though you would never know it from the outside. Its paint had been refreshed just enough to disguise the cracks. The shutters had been replaced with sturdy new wood, and the realtor insisted it was charming, which was, of course, another way of saying that the walls were thin and the plumbing unreliable. But for Sarah and Jesse, it was perfect, or at least perfect enough. They were both students, both stretched thin between jobs and late-night essays, both in desperate need of somewhere cheap to live. And this house was cheap. It had creaky floorboards, peeling wallpaper in places, a faint smell of dust no amount of open windows could cure, but the rent was low enough to silence every misgiving. The two of them laughed about it as they dragged their mismatched furniture into place, setting up mattresses on squealing frames, hanging thrift store curtains that barely touched the floor. They told themselves it would be an adventure, the kind of living arrangement you look back on years later with fondness. The first few nights passed without trouble. Sarah worked late shifts at the coffee shop, often stumbling home after midnight, her shoes sticky with spilled syrup, her hair smelling of espresso. Jessie stayed in most nights, head bent over textbooks, headphones wrapped around her ears. Their schedules barely aligned, but when they did, they shared late meals at the tiny kitchen table, laughing over ramen steam and the drip of the faucet. But then came the night Sarah noticed it. She had gone to bed exhausted, her muscles sore from carrying trays, her mind fogged with caffeine. The sheets were cool against her skin, the hum of the refrigerator in the next room soothing enough to nudge her toward sleep. And then, as she drifted, she felt it. The bed moved. Not much, not violently, just the faintest shiver beneath her, like a subway train rumbling deep under the street, or a neighbor slamming a door. The frame rattled against the wall, a soft tap, tap, tap that might have been dismissed if not for the timing. It happened again, and again. Her eyes opened in the dark. She held her breath, and then came the sound. A low, guttural murmur, muffled, pressed into the floorboards. Not words, at least. Not words she could understand. Just a complaint, a growl, a voice dragging through the wood from somewhere beneath her bed. Sarah sat up sharply, her hair falling into her face, her hands clutching the blanket. The room was still, the shadows stretched long, the only light the faint glow from her phone charging on the nightstand. She waited, pulse hammering, every nerve tuned to the silence. The bed rattled once more, a subtle vibration that shook the headboard. The groan followed, longer this time, rising and falling like someone shifting uncomfortably just beneath her. Her throat tightened. She whispered, almost without sound, "Jessie?" No answer. Of course not. Jessie was in the next room, likely asleep, her door closed. Sarah forced herself to move, sliding one bare foot to the floor, then the other, crouching low to peer into the darkness beneath the bed. Empty. Just dust. Forgotten shoes. The tangle of an extension cord. Sarah exhaled, shaky, and laughed softly at herself. Old houses creaked. Frames loosened. Sound carried strangely in wood this old. She lay back down, pulled the blanket tighter, told herself it was nothing. But sleep did not come easily after that. The next morning, she mentioned it casually over toast, butter spreading unevenly as her hands still trembled faintly. "Hey, did you feel anything weird last night? Like the floor shaking?" Jessie looked up, frowning. Her hair was messy, her glasses crooked, but her eyes were sharp. "No? Why?" Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to sound ridiculous. "I thought maybe the pipes or something. My bed kind of moved." Jessie snorted. Old house. Probably settling. She pushed her glasses up and returned to her notes, dismissing the subject with the ease of someone too busy to entertain ghost stories. Sarah tried to laugh it off too. But that night, it happened again. This time she was wide awake when it started. She lay on her side, scrolling through her phone, the blue light painting her face pale in the dark. The first vibration came like a heartbeat through the mattress, subtle enough she almost missed it. Then another, then the groan, low and drawn out, rising up through the slats like breath through clenched teeth. Sarah froze, thumb hovering above her screen, her pulse racing. She tapped Jessie's name into a message. "Are you awake? Something's moving my bed." She waited, the typing indicator stubbornly absent. Then, finally, a reply blinked onto the screen. Not words, just an emoji. A little figure turned away, a small curve of a back with its head tilted down. Sarah stared at it, frowning. She typed back quickly, "Jessie? What does that mean?" Another emoji appeared. The same one. Her skin prickled. She sat up slowly, clutching the phone, her eyes darting to the wall that separated their rooms. The bed beneath her shuddered once, twice, the frame squealing softly. Then her phone buzzed again. 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 One after another. A flood of them, filling her screen until she couldn't scroll fast enough to keep up. The little figures turned away, their backs cold and indifferent, repeating endlessly. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She whispered into the dark, "Jessie?" But there was no answer, only the sound of the bed rattling beneath her, and the groan of something shifting, something waiting, something pressed close against the underside of her mattress. Sarah kept her phone clutched in her hand long after the screen went dark, her thumb damp with sweat where it pressed against the glass. The silence in her room was absolute, yet she could still feel the weight of the messages, as though they pulsed through the device even when it no longer buzzed. When she finally worked up the courage to look again, the chat thread was flooded. Rows upon rows of the same image. The little figure turned away. Dozens. Hundreds. Each one identical. Each one arriving in steady rhythm, as if someone or something was sending them not from the world of the living but from a place that had no need to pause, no need to breathe. She tried to call Jessie. The ring barely sounded once before the line cut to silence. Then, almost immediately, her phone lit up again. Another message. Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears. She stared at the wall separating their bedrooms. If Jessie was awake, why not just answer? Why not walk across the hall and tell her it was nothing, that she was overreacting? But Jessie didn't come. Instead, the bed beneath Sarah shivered once, then again, harder, the legs rattling against the floorboards. The frame groaned like a voice straining to break through. She gasped, clutching the blanket tighter, her body rigid. The sound rose slowly. No longer just a muffled growl, but something wetter, closer, like the drag of a tongue across dry lips, like the shallow effort of breath forced through collapsed lungs. Sarah pulled her knees up, curling herself away from the floor. Her phone vibrated again in her hand. Another. The rhythm matched the shaking of her bed now, every buzz in her palm aligning with the tremor beneath her spine. Her chest ached with the effort of holding her breath. She told herself not to look, not to lean over the edge, not to let her eyes wander toward the shadows beneath her bed. There were things you could not unsee. The buzzing stopped. For a moment she thought it was over. Her ears rang in the quiet, her body sagging against the mattress with exhausted relief. Then the bed lurched violently, harder than before, lifting off the floorboards by the slightest fraction, slamming down again. Sarah screamed without meaning to, her voice raw, small, swallowed by the room. The groan beneath her became a moan, dragging upward through the wood, scraping like bone on bone. It pressed into her spine, as though whatever lay under there was arching its back to meet her. Her phone lit again, this time not just the emoji. Sarah, her name. She froze, her eyes locked on the glowing screen, on the word that should have brought comfort but instead hollowed her chest with terror. Another message appeared, and another. Her throat tightened. She whispered into the empty air, "Jessie?" But no reply came from the other room. Only another buzz. Sarah pressed herself into the headboard, pulling her blanket around her as though it could shield her from the weight shifting beneath the bed frame. She imagined skeletal hands curling around the slats, imagined a face pressed against the underside of the mattress, lips brushing the fabric, whispering into her bones. The bed trembled again, harder, the wood screaming in protest. She bit down on a sob. She couldn't look. She couldn't. And then, a new sound. Knock, knock, soft, deliberate, from beneath her pillow, as though knuckles dragged gently against the boards. Her phone lit one final time. Turn around. Sarah had never been more aware of the weight of silence. It sat on her chest like a stone, pressing every breath into shallow gasps, stretching every second into unbearable length. Her bed no longer moved, but the stillness was worse than the rattling. The absence of sound was its own kind of noise, screaming in her ears, demanding that she act, that she decide. Her phone still glowed faintly in her hand, the last message staring up at her like an eye she couldn't close. Turn around. The letters seemed to vibrate on the glass, a command not typed by fingers but carved into the screen by something colder. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, clutching the blanket to her chin, rocking slightly as though motion could anchor her to the living world. But the pressure beneath her bed was undeniable. She could feel it, a tension rising through the mattress, as though the very air down there was coiled and waiting. At last, trembling, she whispered into the dark, "If this is a joke, Jessie, it isn't funny." Her own voice sounded alien, too thin, too small. No reply came, no footsteps from the other room. Only silence. Sarah swallowed hard, forcing herself upright. Her legs shook as she slid them over the edge of the bed, her bare feet brushing the cold floorboards. She sat there for long moments, listening, her hand white-knuckled around her phone. The glow of the screen painted the floor in faint blue light, just enough to trace the outline of her shadow trembling across the boards. She leaned forward, slowly, painfully. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, louder than the faint creak of the frame as she shifted her weight. Her hand shook as she lowered the phone toward the floor, angling its light toward the dark mouth of space beneath her bed. Dust swirled, motes catching the faint glow. Shadows pressed close, and then she saw it. Not at once, not in clear focus. At first, it was just a suggestion of shape curves too rigid to be blankets, lines too sharp to be storage boxes. The dust was thicker around it, clinging to angles, caked into crevices. Sarah lowered the phone further. Her breath caught in her throat. The light brushed across the unmistakable outline of a rib cage. She recoiled instantly, smacking the back of her head against the wall, biting back a cry that almost broke into a scream. But her eyes couldn't look away. The glow of her phone painted the remains in stark relief. A body, or what was left of one, curled awkwardly on its side beneath her bed. The bones were dry, yellowed with age, but they still held shape: the curve of the spine, the jut of the shoulder blades, the thin stretch of fingers clutching tight around something. Sarah's stomach twisted. She pressed a hand to her mouth, gagging silently. Her body shaking so violently the phone almost slipped from her grip, but she forced herself to look. The object clutched in the skeleton's hand gleamed faintly, metal reflecting the pale light. She shifted closer, her knees digging into the floor, her whole body trembling as she angled the glow downward. It was a phone, not hers, not some relic from decades past, but a modern phone, the kind Jessie carried everywhere. Sarah's breath fractured into gasps. Her hands went clammy. She crawled closer despite every instinct screaming at her to flee, pressing her face toward the shadows until the details sharpened. The phone's screen was cracked but faintly lit, the battery nearly drained, and there, in the corner of the display, her own name was visible. A thread of messages, endless, repeating, lined the screen. Her heart nearly stopped. The same messages she had been receiving, the same words, the same symbols, all sent from the device clutched in the fingers of the skeleton beneath her bed. Her mind reeled. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped her own phone. She wanted to call out for Jessie again, to scream, to demand an explanation, but the air was thick in her throat, choking her silent. She crawled back, stumbling to her feet, retreating until her back struck the far wall of her room. Her chest heaved, her vision blurred with tears, her knees threatening to give way. She knew what she had seen. The skeleton was real, the phone was real, and Jessie, her friend, her roommate, the one she had been texting, was not, or at least, not anymore. The silence in the room seemed to thicken, pressing against her ears, amplifying her ragged breaths until they sounded like someone else's. She stared at the bed, at the dark space beneath it, waiting for movement, waiting for the next sound. And then her phone vibrated again. She flinched violently, nearly dropping it, but forced herself to look. A new message had arrived. Not the repetitive figure turned away. Not her name, just words, slow and deliberate. "I can feel your back getting cold." Sarah froze, her breath stopping in her chest. And then, from the shadows beneath the bed came the faintest scrape of bone against wood, dragging, deliberate, shifting closer. Sarah's chest ached as though she had been holding her breath for hours, but in truth only seconds had passed. She stood against the far wall, staring across the room at the shadowed bed, her body locked in trembling stillness. Beneath it lay the skeleton, the shriveled bones curled like a secret, one bony hand clutching Jessie's phone. That much was undeniable now. She could still see the faint glow of its cracked screen in the dark, her name lined again and again in the endless thread of messages. Her own phone vibrated in her palm once more. She didn't want to look. Every part of her screamed not to. And yet, against her will, her eyes dropped to the display. Another message. This one came slowly, almost languidly, as though typed in the room with her. Keystroke by keystroke. "I am not under the bed anymore." Sarah's body seized with dread. She lifted her eyes sharply, scanning the dim corners of the room, her pulse pounding in her ears so loudly she could barely hear herself gasp. The shadows seemed thicker than they had moments before. The corners felt deeper, darker, as though they had grown while she wasn't looking. Her phone buzzed again. "You never checked the other side." Her throat closed, her body rigid. The other side, the words pressed themselves into her skull, unshakable, slowly, almost mechanically. She turned her head toward the wall at her back, where the window's glass reflected only darkness. Silence stretched, taut, unbearable. Then came the sound, Not beneath her bed this time. Behind her, a soft scraped metal dragged across wood, long and deliberate. Sarah pressed her back harder into the wall, as though she could fuse herself into the plaster, as though she could disappear into it and escape whatever had shifted closer. Her body trembled with the effort of holding still. Another sound followed, breathing, not hers. It was heavier, wetter, carrying a rasp like air forced through a chest that no longer worked. It filled the small space of the room, curling around her shoulders, brushing her hair as though it could be touched. Her phone lit again in her trembling hands. This time the words appeared before she could even finish reading the last line. "I like how still you stand." Sarah whimpered, unable to stop herself. Her knees buckled and she slid partway down the wall, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped the phone. Her mind screamed to run, to burst through the door, to flee the house entirely, but her body refused. It was as though the words themselves had rooted her to the floor. The air grew colder. Her skin prickled as though touched by unseen fingers. She dared a glance at the window, hoping for light, for some reflection to anchor her, but the glass only showed her own pale face, and behind it, something darker, too tall, too close, standing just behind her shoulder. Her heart stopped. She twisted violently, slamming herself away from the window's reflection, but the room was empty. The bed stood where it had, the shadows no deeper than before. And yet the breathing did not stop. Her phone buzzed once more, the final message burning into her eyes. "Do not look down." Her gaze, despite her desperate will, flicked downward. The floor at her feet was no longer still. A shadow stretched outward, a hand-shaped void darker than the dark around it, reaching slowly up her leg. The message glared up at her like an open wound. "Do not look down." But she had already looked. Her gaze lingered on the shadow hand curling upward from the floorboards, a shape so impossibly black it seemed to eat the faint light her phone cast. The fingers stretched, twitched, flexed, as though warming themselves on her fear. They reached not toward the bed, not toward the skeleton beneath it, but toward her own body, her own trembling form pressed against the wall. Sarah's mouth opened in a silent scream. No sound escaped. The hand brushed her ankle, cold and dry as parchment, and yet clammy, wet at the same time, as if it belonged both to bone and to flesh. Her body convulsed in revolt. She kicked backward against the wall, curling up, trying to claw herself away from the touch. But the shadow didn't grip her. Not yet. It only lingered, curling gently, almost soothingly, as though testing the warmth of her skin. Her phone buzzed again. The vibration rattled in her palm, a shiver through her bones. She forced her eyes down to the screen. "It's warmer here than under the bed." Sarah sobbed once, a broken, shuddering sound, and flung the phone across the room. It hit the wall, cracked, and fell face down on the floorboards. The glow died, plunging the room into a deeper dark. For a moment, she thought it was over, but then the other phone, the one clutched in the hand of the skeleton, lit up under the bed. Its glow seeped through the dust, pale and sickly, illuminating the curve of bone fingers, and on its screen, a message appeared. Though Sarah hadn't touched it, "I like your back better than hers." Her breath fractured. She staggered to her feet, swaying, her eyes locked on the glowing screen beneath the bed. The words kept appearing, line after line, spilling out faster than fingers could type. "You don't answer fast enough. I waited for you. Jessie was too cold. Now you're warmer." Sarah stumbled toward the door, her hands fumbling at the knob. She twisted, pulled, shoved, but it didn't give. It felt fused into the frame, the wood pulsing faintly beneath her palms as though it had been sealed shut with something more than nails. Her chest heaved. She banged against the door with her fists. Then, from behind her, the bed shifted. The groan of old wood filled the room, and the mattress sagged as though something had crawled onto it. The springs protested, squealing under weight. Sarah spun, pressing her back to the unyielding door, her eyes wide and stinging with tears. The bed sank deeper, and from atop it, the sheets stirred. Her phone, her own, cracked and broken on the floor, lit up again despite its smashed screen. Its glow painted the room in fractured light, illuminating the surface of the bed where the outline of a body now lay. A body curled beneath the blanket, its back turned toward her. Sarah's throat locked. Her mind screamed denial, but her body froze, recognizing the shape even before the light touched the familiar fall of hair. the angle of the shoulders. Jesse, or something that wore Jesse's outline. Slowly, mechanically, the figure shifted under the blanket. A low groan rumbled through the room. One Sarah remembered from a dozen nights of hearing her friend roll over. Then the figure stilled, its back exposed, its presence undeniable. Her phone buzzed one final time. "Turn around." The words chilled her marrow. They weren't on the screen now, but in her mind, pressed into the hollow of her skull, whispered directly into the bone. She could feel them, as though something crouched just behind her, lips against her ear, voice sliding into her. "Heknis Bokle." She turned, and there, in the cracked reflection of the window pane, she saw herself not standing, not clutching the knob in terror, but curled beneath the bed, her own body shriveled and dry, hand clutching a phone. Her own name lit up again and again on the glowing screen. The figure on the bed shifted once more, rolling slightly, its back still facing her, its hair falling into the shadow. And in that moment, Sarah no longer knew which one of them was real. The reflection beneath the bed blinked. The phone buzzed in the silence. One last message appeared. "I can feel your back getting cold." And then there was only stillness. Story 5. The blind date bus. Midnight. The city doesn't fall asleep, it exhales. The neon signs crackle with tired electricity. Traffic lights cycle through their colors for no one at all. And the rain that fell earlier in the evening lingers in the gutters, reflecting pale slices of moonlight. Daniel had stayed out too long. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the quiet bar he lingered in, waiting for a text message that never arrived. Maybe it was the aimless way he'd walked afterward, drifting without a destination. All he knew was that when he finally reached the bus stop, the sign announced clearly, coldly, that the last bus had come and gone 20 minutes ago. He checked his phone, but the screen was a blank sheet of silence. No calls, no messages. He thought briefly of ordering a cab, but something in him resisted. He didn't want to explain where he was. He didn't want to admit, even to a stranger on the other end of an app, that he had stayed out too late, hoping for company that never came. So he waited. The wind moved down the street like an invisible tide, rattling the loose metal shutter of a closed bakery. A faint smell of rain, and something sharper like rust or damp earth carried on the air. The street lamps buzzed. One flickered, almost winking, as if to say, "Go home." Then he saw it. At the far end of the street, a pair of headlights glowed. Dim, amber, not the harsh white beams of modern buses. The sound of an engine rumbled low, uneven, as though it had been idling for hours. Slowly, impossibly slowly, the bus crept into view. Daniel frowned. That couldn't be right. There wasn't supposed to be another bus tonight. He glanced back at the timetable on the post. Last departure, 11:40 p.m. Now, it was just past midnight. The vehicle drew closer. Its metal sides were streaked with rain and something darker. The front window reflected nothing, just a black sheen that swallowed the light. And then, as it reached him, the doors opened with a long hiss. Not the quick, hydraulic sigh he was used to, but a drawn-out sound like the release of something that had been holding its breath for too long. Daniel stepped back, instinct prickling at him. Inside the bus, no light spilled out. The interior was a hollow shadow, with only a faint glimmer from the aisle lamps. He told himself it was fine. Just a late-night service, maybe unscheduled. Drivers sometimes made unscheduled rounds, didn't they? The driver's seat was cast in shadow. He couldn't see the driver at all. Couldn't even see movement. The doors remained open, the hiss fading into silence. The bus waited. Daniel's throat felt dry. He considered walking away, maybe ordering that cab after all. But the streets behind him felt darker now, emptier. The thought of standing alone beneath that flickering street lamp, with the silence pressing in, it was worse than the thought of a strange bus. So he stepped forward. The air inside was cold. Not the damp chill of the night, but something sharper, like air trapped in a cellar. The smell hit him first. Dust, old fabric, and faintly, the sweet, cloying trace of incense. The overhead lights were out. Only a few orange lamps along the aisle glowed, flickering weakly. They illuminated fragments. The edge of a seat, a strip of floor, the outline of hands resting in laps. Hands. Daniel's stomach tightened. The bus wasn't empty. As his eyes adjusted, he realized every seat was occupied. Figures sat in perfect silence, one after another, row upon row. Each of them wore black. Suits, dresses, coats. Not modern black, something older, plainer, as if they had all stepped out of a funeral decades ago and simply stayed that way. No one moved. No one looked up. Daniel swallowed and slipped into a seat near the back. He told himself it was fine. A night bus. People kept to themselves. Maybe there had been a service, some kind of memorial. They were tired. That was all. But the silence pressed against him. It was too complete. No coughs, no sniffles, no creak of fabric as someone shifted in their seat. They might as well have been statues. He tried to distract himself, fumbled for his phone, but the screen refused to wake. Dead battery, or maybe something else. He pressed the power button again. Nothing. A prickling sensation crawled over his skin. And then, a whisper. Close. Too close. Everyone on this bus is dead. Daniel froze. His pulse hammered in his ears. Slowly, with effort, he turned his head. The woman in the next seat leaned slightly toward him. Her hair fell like a veil across her face, concealing her eyes. Only her mouth was visible, pale against the dark. He swallowed. His voice came out thin. I'm sorry." The woman's lips barely moved. Her voice was quieter this time, as if she were speaking to herself, but every syllable pressed sharp against his ear. "This bus doesn't go to your home. It goes to theirs." She tilted her head slightly, almost imperceptibly, toward the passengers in the rows ahead. Daniel's breath caught. He stared down the aisle. None of the figures had moved. None acknowledged her words. He shook his head, whispering back before he could stop himself. That's not funny." The woman gave the smallest hint of a smile, though it was hard to tell if it reached her lips. She leaned closer, her voice brushing his skin. "They're waiting. They need someone new." His chest tightened. Someone new for what? This time, she exhaled as she spoke, and her breath was colder than it should have been. They need a driver. The bus lurched forward, and Daniel gripped the seat in front of him, his knuckles pale. He turned toward the window, but the streets outside were gone. No buildings, no lamps, no traffic signals, only darkness pressing against the glass, thick and endless, as though the city had been erased. That was the moment Daniel realized. He hadn't just boarded the wrong bus. He had boarded something that wasn't supposed to be here at all, and it wasn't taking him anywhere he wanted to go. The bus rolled forward, deeper into the dark, and Daniel pressed a hand against the glass, as if he could force the night outside, to show him something familiar. But there was nothing, no trace of the city, no passing buildings, not even the suggestion of street lamps. Just a black expanse, thick and unmoving, like the window had been painted over. He turned back to the aisle. The passengers were still there, dozens of them, lined up in their rows. The faint glow from the aisle lamps gave them enough shape to be recognizable as human. But the longer he looked, the less sure he became. Their posture was too stiff, their heads tilted forward slightly, as if they were all asleep at the same angle. None of them had moved since he'd boarded. He tried to focus on something else, his hands, for instance. He rubbed them together for warmth, but they felt clammy. His palms were damp, though he wasn't sweating. His breath fogged slightly in the air, and that was when he realized just how cold the bus had become. It wasn't the chill of night air leaking through windows. This was different, heavy, dry, like the breath of a tomb. Daniel forced himself to look away from the still passengers and toward the front of the bus. He squinted into the shadow where the driver should have been. The wheel was there, faintly visible in the gloom, but the seat behind it was little more than a black silhouette. He couldn't make out a head or shoulders. He couldn't make out movement at all, and yet the bus was moving. He leaned slightly into the aisle. His voice was low, but it felt deafening against the suffocating silence. "Excuse me, driver?" No response. No shift. No sign he had even been heard. Daniel sat back quickly, his pulse thudding. His seat felt colder than it should have been, as if something had seeped into the fabric long before he sat down. He rubbed his arms, trying to generate warmth, but it didn't help. Then he remembered the woman beside him. Slowly, he turned to her. She hadn't moved either. Her face was still half hidden by her hair, her lips pale, almost gray. She sat perfectly still, hands folded neatly in her lap, as if waiting for something. Daniel wet his lips. "Was that a joke? What you said earlier?" The woman's head tilted slightly toward him. The corner of her mouth lifted just enough to show the outline of a smile. "Do they look like they're laughing?" she asked softly. Daniel glanced down the rows again. The passengers sat in silence, in shadow. Their clothes were old-fashioned, threadbare in places. The black fabric dulled into shades of gray. He noticed shoes too polished, too clean, as though they had never touched a street. His throat tightened. Who are they?" The woman's voice was calm, almost kind, but each word carried a weight that pressed against him. "They are what remains. Echoes of people who once waited, just like you. All of them took this bus when they should have walked away." Daniel shook his head. No, that doesn't make sense. This is a bus. It's just a bus." Her pale mouth curved. "Then why does it feel like a coffin?" The question slipped into his chest like a blade of ice. He looked again at the passengers. In the dim glow, he noticed something he hadn't before. Their hands. Each one rested neatly on their knees, fingers stiff, too pale against the black of their clothing. He stared harder. The skin wasn't right. It wasn't flesh. Not anymore. The fingers looked smooth, almost waxy, like mannequins, or corpses. A sudden wave of nausea rolled through him. He turned back to the woman, desperate for something, an explanation, a denial, anything to break the rising terror. But she only whispered, "You shouldn't have boarded. They've been waiting for someone new." He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. "Waiting for what?" he managed at last. The woman didn't answer immediately. Her head tilted further, as though she were listening to something distant. Then she leaned closer, her breath brushing his ear with unnatural cold. "For a driver." Daniel pulled back sharply. "That's not funny," he hissed. Her smile widened, thin and unchanging. "It isn't a joke." He tried to stand, to step into the aisle, but his knees felt heavy, as if the air itself pressed down on him. He gripped the seat in front of him and forced himself upright. The aisle stretched ahead like a tunnel, lined with motionless figures. He started toward the front. Each step felt wrong, as though he were moving through a dream that fought against his will. Halfway up the aisle, he stopped. Something had shifted. The passengers. He hadn't seen them move, but now their heads were lifted. Not much, just a fraction. Enough for their faces to catch the dim orange light. Their eyes were closed. Every single one. But their mouths had opened. Silent, slack, as if ready to speak in unison. Daniel stumbled backward, pressing a hand against the nearest seat. His breath came fast, sharp. Then, faintly, he heard it. A sound that wasn't quite a whisper, not quite a sigh. A collective exhale rising and falling in the same rhythm. He clutched at the seat, forcing himself not to scream. His voice cracked as he muttered, "This isn't real. This isn't real." The woman's voice floated from behind him, gentle as dust, real enough to take you with them. Has spun, stumbling back toward her. "Why are you telling me this? If this is what it looks like, then why are you here?" Her lips curved in that faint, unnerving smile. "I'm not like them. I got off. Once." Daniel stared at her. "Got off? What do you mean?" Her head tilted, the hair shifting slightly to reveal the pale line of her jaw. "It's not easy. Not everyone makes it. Most don't even try. But I did. And tonight I thought, maybe I'd try again. A different kind of escape." Her words hung in the air, cold and cryptic. Daniel shook his head. "You're not making any sense." The bus jolted suddenly, throwing him against the seat. He caught himself, gripping the armrest. Outside, the windows flickered with movement. But when he looked, it wasn't buildings he saw. Shapes slid past dark, tall, unrecognizable. They didn't move like trees, or lampposts, or anything rooted to the ground. They moved like shadows of things walking beside the bus, keeping pace. He tore his gaze away, forcing himself back into his seat. His chest rose and fell in ragged bursts. The woman leaned closer again, her whispers steady and deliberate. "You can't stop it now. You're already here. The only question is whether you'll sit with them." Her pale hand unfolded in her lap, pointing down the aisle toward the unmoving passengers. "Or whether you'll drive." Daniel's stomach dropped. He tried to laugh, a broken, hollow sound. "This is insane." "End of." Her face remained still, calm. "Then why does it feel true?" He wanted to argue, to insist on logic, to demand proof, but deep inside, something colder than fear told him she was right. And as the bus rumbled deeper into the dark, he realized that for the first time since he'd boarded, he could feel dozens of eyes watching him, even though they all remained closed. Daniel sat rigid in his seat, his pulse hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. The aisle stretched before him like a tunnel carved out of silence, lined with rows of unmoving passengers. The sound of the bus's engine was steady, too steady, as though it had been looping the same note over and over. The woman beside him didn't shift. Her pale hands rested lightly in her lap, her posture serene, but her words lingered in him, cold as frost. "You'll sit with them, or you'll drive." He shook his head violently, whispering under his breath, "No, I'm not doing this. This isn't happening." The woman turned slightly toward him. The corner of her mouth curved as if she had been waiting for that exact denial. "You're already part of it," she murmured. "Every breath you take here makes it harder to leave." Daniel swallowed hard. "Then I'll get off. Next stop. I don't care where it is, I'll get off." Her pale lips quirked higher, though not in amusement. "What makes you think there will be a stop?" Daniel froze. The bus had been moving for what felt like hours, yet he hadn't seen a single landmark outside. Just that suffocating darkness, occasionally brushed with shifting shapes that never resolved into anything real. His throat tightened. "There has to be one." The woman leaned in, close enough that he could feel the chill radiating from her skin. "Listen." At first he heard only the thrum of the engine. Then beneath it something else. A faint, rhythmic sound. He strained to identify it. It wasn't the tires on asphalt. It wasn't machinery. It was breathing. Not his, not hers, but dozens of shallow, synchronized inhales and exhales, rising and falling in perfect unison with the engine's hum. He glanced down the aisle again. The passengers hadn't moved. Their eyes were still shut, their mouths slightly open, but now he saw their chests rising and falling together. He whispered, "Oh my God." The woman's eyes gleamed faintly in the dim light. They breathed for the road. The bus goes as long as they exhale. Without them, it stops. Daniel pressed his palms against his face, trying to block it out. "I don't want this. I didn't choose this." "You boarded," she said softly. That was enough. He dropped his hands, glaring at her. "Why me? There are dozens of people here. Why me?" She tilted her head as if considering. "Because you're not like them. Not yet. You still carry heat. You still fight. And that makes me a driver?" His voice cracked. "It makes you a candidate," she whispered. "Someone to hold the wheel when the last one burns out." Daniel shuddered. He turned his gaze to the front of the bus, the dark silhouette in the driver's seat. He still couldn't make out details, but the shape seemed thinner now, as if the figure had been dissolving since the moment he boarded. His stomach knotted. "There is someone there," he muttered, half to himself. "There is a driver." The woman's lips barely moved. "For now." Daniel clenched his fists. "Then I'll talk to him. I'll tell him I don't belong here, that I need to get off." Her faint smile didn't falter. "Try." He pushed himself up again, his legs trembling as he stepped into the aisle. The passengers didn't move, but the weight of their presence pressed against him. He could feel their silent breathing vibrate in the air. One step, 2 steps. He forced his eyes forward, refusing to glance into their pale, waxy faces. The darkness ahead seemed thicker, as though every stride pulled him deeper into something that wasn't space at all but a narrowing corridor. Halfway there, he slowed. The passengers had shifted again. Not much, just their heads, turning slightly toward him. Eyes still closed, mouths still parted, but their faces tilted in his direction, as though tracking his every step. His breath caught. "Don't look," he muttered. "Don't look, just keep going." He forced his legs to move until he reached the driver's seat. His throat tightened as he leaned closer. "Hey," he whispered hoarsely. "You don't have to do this anymore. I don't belong here. I don't want this." The figure in the seat didn't move. Daniel hesitated, then reached out and touched the back of the chair. The fabric was brittle, like something left too long in the Sunday. Slowly, he leaned forward, and then he saw. The seat was occupied, but not by anyone alive. The figure was a husk, its clothes slumped over bones that had long since dried to dust. The skull tilted slightly to the side, jaw open in a silent scream. The hands, skeletal, stiff, were fused to the wheel, as though they had been gripping it for decades. Daniel staggered back, bile rising in his throat. Oh God! Oh God! The bus jolted violently, throwing him sideways into a seat. For the first time, he heard something new, a cracking sound, faint but sharp, like ice breaking. He looked up. The skeletal hands were splintering. Tiny fractures ran through the bones, glowing faintly as if something inside was burning them out. The jaw trembled, the skull shifting, and then the husk collapsed, bones snapping into dust, the clothes deflating around the wheel. The bus shuddered, slowed for a fraction of a second, and then every passenger exhaled in unison, a long, heavy breath that filled the silence like wind through a graveyard. The bus surged forward again. Daniel froze, his chest heaving. The driver's seat was empty now, the wheel unmoving. Yet the bus did not stop. Behind him, the woman's voice carried softly. Now you see. The seat is open. He turned, trembling, and found her watching him with that same still smile. No, he whispered. I can't. I won't. You don't have long, she murmured. The road doesn't wait. It only devours. If you don't take the wheel, you'll sit with them. Daniel's eyes darted to the passengers. Their mouths hung wider now, breath rising and falling more violently. Their heads tilted higher, the angle unnatural, as though their necks were stretching toward him. He staggered back, retreating down the aisle. No, no. The woman rose from her seat at last, her movements fluid, deliberate. Her eyes, when they caught the dim light, reflected it strangely, like stone polished smooth. You want to leave? She asked softly. There's only one way. Daniel's back hit a seat. He tried to push past, but her hand shot out, gripping his wrist. Her skin was ice. I left once, she whispered, her voice too calm. I can show you how, but it isn't free. Nothing ever is. Daniel yanked at his arm, panic searing through him. What do you want? Her lips curved higher. A date. The words struck him like a blow. His mind reeled. What are you talking about? Her pale fingers tightened around his wrist, her cold seeping into his veins. They need a driver. I need something else. Someone alive, someone warm. Someone to keep me company when I step away. Daniel shook his head violently. No, I won't. You don't have a choice, she whispered, leaning closer, her breath like frost against his cheek. Either you sit with them, or you drive, or you come with me. Her other hand lifted, brushing against his face. The touch was light, almost tender, but so cold it burned. Daniel's chest heaved. I just want to go home. Her faint smile widened. So did I. For a heartbeat, the bus seemed to hold still. The passengers' breathing slowed. The engine hummed low. Daniel felt the world narrow to the woman's face. Her stone-pale skin, her eyes that seemed to look straight through him. Then she whispered, choose. The word echoed inside him, rattling his bones. Daniel's knees buckled. He collapsed into a seat, clutching his head. His mind screamed for escape, but every option spiraled into the same nightmare. The empty driver's seat, the row of silent passengers, the woman's pale hands gripping his wrist. He whispered, hoarse and broken, I don't want any of it. The woman's cold lips brushed his ear. Want has nothing to do with it. And as the bus rumbled deeper into the endless dark, Daniel realized he had only seconds left before someone chose for him. Daniel's body trembled with each breath. The words still reverberated inside him, choose, as if the bus itself had whispered it through its walls, its bones, its wheels. His hands dug into the worn fabric of the seat, trying to anchor himself against the weight of that demand. The woman's grip on his wrist was still there, unyielding, her skin colder than anything he had ever felt. He thought his veins would freeze if she held on much longer. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dimness, pale reflections of something older than the bus, older than the road. Let me go, he rasped. Her head tilted slightly, a gesture that carried a strange patience. If I let go, you'll only fall deeper. Don't you see? The road doesn't care about your struggles. It cares only for balance. The wheel is empty. The seat is waiting. If not you, then who? Daniel's chest rose and fell. His gaze darted down the aisle, toward the rows of passengers. Their heads leaned at sharp angles, eyes still sealed shut, but their mouths had stretched wider. The sound of their collective breathing now resembled a storm tide, rising, crashing, ebbing. He couldn't look at them for long. He turned back to her, his voice low and broken. Why me? Why did you bring me here? The woman's expression softened, almost sorrowful. You were walking alone, hungry for something you couldn't name. People like you. The road notices. It always notices. Daniel shook his head. I wasn't hungry. I was just... He stopped. His own words betrayed him. He was hungry. Hungry for connection, for someone to share the silence with. That's why he had been out tonight. Why he had missed the last bus in the first place. The woman's smile was faint, sympathetic. You were searching, and so was I. He felt his throat close. What? What are you? She leaned closer, her breath still as cold as frost. I was like you once, long ago. One night I boarded a bus that shouldn't have existed. It was raining, and I thought I was lucky to catch it. I sat, and I waited, and I realized too late what I had stepped into. The driver's seat was empty then, too. And when it opened, I thought if I took it, I could escape, that maybe I could drive myself home. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the front of the bus. Daniel followed her gaze, shuddering at the empty chair. Her voice dropped to a whisper. But it wasn't home. It was here, always here. The road doesn't let you go. Daniel swallowed hard. So you became like them. Her eyes returned to his. Steady. Not like them. Not bound to the breathing. Not empty. I walked away. But the road marked me. It carved itself into my skin, into my veins. And now I wander between both places, neither living nor gone. Waiting. Watching. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. You're trapped. She nodded once. And I don't want to be anymore. Her hand tightened around his wrist. That's why I need you. The words struck him, chilling him deeper than the frost of her touch. He shook his head violently. No, I won't. Listen, she interrupted, her voice sharp for the first time. The storm of breathing from the passengers swelled louder, drowning the hum of the engine. The walls of the bus shuddered as though under pressure. If you refuse the wheel, she said, they'll tear you apart, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but breath. Daniel's chest heaved. His mind spun. Drive, or sit with them. Drive, or be consumed. And if I go with you? His words spilled out, desperate. If I take your hand and walk away, what then? Her expression shifted again. Softer, more human. For a moment she looked like any woman he might have seen on a midnight bus. Tired, lonely, haunted. Then you'll stay with me. Between places. Not breathing their breath. Not driving their road. Just us. Together. Daniel's heart pounded. He stared into her eyes, trying to find deceit, but all he saw was exhaustion, longing, the faint shimmer of centuries-old grief. You want me, he said quietly. Not as a driver, not as another passenger, but as, his voice faltered, as a companion. Her pale lips parted, and her voice trembled. I've been alone too long. The silence between them deepened. Only the ragged tide of passenger breath filled it. Daniel's thoughts tumbled. Stay with her. Be devoured. Take the wheel. None of it was survival. All of it was damnation. His breath shook. I can't do this. Her grip did not loosen. You must. I can't, he repeated, louder, desperation raw in his voice. I can't choose any of it. I just want to go home. The word home cracked something in her. Her eyes flickered, shadows dancing in their depths. She drew closer, so close, her forehead nearly touched his. Do you think I don't remember home? She whispered fiercely. The smell of bread baking, the sound of rain on real windows, not this endless dark, the warmth of a hand that wasn't ice. I remember all of it, and that's why I can't stay like this any longer. Don't you see? You and I were the same. Daniel closed his eyes, fighting the urge to believe her. She sounded so human, but when her hand slid from his wrist to his chest, he flinched violently. Her palm pressed flat against his heart, and he felt the cold pulse of her touch sinking with his own heartbeat. For a moment, the world flickered. The dark outside the windows peeled back, revealing fragments. A kitchen table bathed in sunlight, a dog barking in a yard, a crowded cafe with laughter spilling out its door. Home, life, warmth. Then it was gone. The bus thundered on through the void. Her voice broke. I can give you that, Daniel. I can give you glimpses, fragments, pieces of what you lost. All you have to do is take my hand and agree." His throat closed. He wanted to scream. He wanted to cry. But the choice stood before him, heavy as iron. Behind him, the passengers shifted. Slowly their eyes opened. Dozens of pale orbs, clouded and unseeing, stared straight ahead. Their mouths still hung open, breath seeping like fog. But their eyes, God, their eyes turned toward him as one. Daniel stumbled backward, heart hammering. "They're awake." And the woman didn't turn. She kept her gaze on him, her hand still pressed against his chest. "They're waiting. The wheel can't stay empty." The rows of passengers began to stir. Their hands twitched, their heads cracked at odd angles, their jaws unhinged wider. The sound of their breath deepened, vibrating through the bus like a chant. Daniel's voice rose, panicked. "They're going to choose," she cried, cutting him off. The aisle warped in his vision, stretching toward the front where the empty driver's seat loomed. The skeletal dust of the last driver still clung to the wheel, glowing faintly. The seat seemed to pull at him, dragging his body forward even as the woman's cold touch anchored him in place. He was trapped between them. Drive. Be consumed. Walk with her. His chest heaved, his voice ragged. "What happens if I take the wheel?" Her gaze darkened. "Then you drive. Forever. Until you burn away like the last one. And when you collapse into dust, they'll find another." Daniel's breath caught. "And if I go with you?" Her lips curved faintly. "Then you'll never be alone again." The passengers' chant grew louder, their breaths grinding like stone. The bus shook under the weight of their demand. Daniel pressed his hands to his temples, screaming, "I don't want either." The lights inside the bus flickered violently. The void outside surged against the windows like a tide, pressing inward, trying to swallow him whole. The woman leaned closer, her voice soft again, almost gentle. "Daniel, you already chose when you boarded. The road doesn't invite by accident. It opens for the willing. Deep down, you wanted this." He shook his head furiously. "No, I didn't." But her words pierced him, because some part of him knew. He had wanted something. Company, escape, an end to the gnawing loneliness. The wheel glowed brighter. The aisle pulsed with each breath of the passengers. Her hand pressed tighter against his chest, as if she could take his heart into her own. Daniel was breaking. With a sob, he looked into her eyes. "If I go with you, will it hurt?" Her expression softened, tender as a lover's. "Not like sitting with them, not like driving. It will be cold, but it will be ours." He hesitated, trembling. His soul screamed for release, and then something inside him shifted. A flicker of anger, of defiance. He straightened, tearing his gaze from her. His voice cracked but carried steel. "No, I won't give you what you want. I won't drive, and I won't be your date. I want to live." The bus roared as if offended. The passengers shrieked, a guttural harmony of breath and sound. The woman's eyes widened, not in rage, but in sorrow. "Then you'll burn," she whispered, and the bus plunged into chaos. The night air hit Daniel's face with a rush that felt almost holy in its clarity. He staggered onto the pavement, lungs aching as if he had been underwater too long. The sound of the bus, if it had ever been a bus at all, faded behind him, and for a moment he was convinced that he had truly escaped. His chest rose and fell in shuddering gulps, sweat cooling across his forehead, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the city lights glimmered ahead like salvation. He bent forward, hands on his knees, trying to steady his breathing. Somewhere a distant car horn honked, and he thought, "That's it, that's real, that's ordinary," the kind of noise he had always ignored. Yet now it seemed like proof that the world hadn't entirely slipped away. He laughed, or tried to, though it came out ragged, more like a sob. The girl stood beside him, unruffled by the frantic escape. Her hair fell across her face in long, dark strands, but when the breeze shifted, he caught the outline of her smile. "You did well," she said softly. Her voice was calm, almost indulgent, like a teacher congratulating a child for finishing a lesson. "Most don't make it this far." Daniel swallowed, turning to her fully. The streetlight above flickered, as if hesitating before dying, and in that faltering glow he studied her more carefully. Her skin seemed strange. Pale, yes, but not in the way of someone sickly or tired. It was flat, matte like stone that had been polished too smooth. He blinked, and the illusion broke. but unease clung stubbornly to his ribs. I don't... His voice cracked. He forced it out again. I don't even know your name. The girl tilted her head. Names are funny, aren't they? Everyone clings to them like they mean something permanent. But names slip, change, get taken away. She smiled again, this time with teeth just barely too sharp. You can call me whatever you like. Tonight it won't matter. Something in her tone struck him as final, and he felt cold seep into his spine. He tried to distract himself, turning back toward the road. I should get home, he muttered, more to himself than her. I need... But the words dissolved. The city before him no longer looked like the one he knew. The street stretched too long, like an endless corridor. The buildings leaned inward, their windows black and unblinking, as if the whole neighborhood had emptied itself of life. He took a tentative step forward, and the sound of his footfall echoed unnaturally, a hollow clap that did not match the concrete beneath him. Home, she repeated, almost amused. And where would that be? Daniel frowned. What kind of question is that? My apartment. On 43rd, near the park. Slake. She looked at him as though he had spoken in a language she had never heard. 43rd? Do you mean the street that burned down? Or the one that was torn apart for the new highway? Her voice lowered, conspiratorial. Or the one where no one lives anymore, because they all took the bus. His stomach dropped. He shook his head violently. No, that's not right. I know where I live. I know it. Yet even as he insisted, the details slipped like water through his fingers. What color was the door to his apartment? Which floor did he climb each night? The memory fuzzed and wavered, as though someone had breathed fog across the glass of his mind. The girl took his hand. Her skin was cold, so cold it burned. He flinched, but she held on. Don't fight it, she whispered. The more you struggle, the longer it hurts. Daniel ripped his hand free, stumbling back. His heel struck the edge of the pavement, and he nearly fell. Stay away from me, she laughed. It was not mocking, but soft, intimate, the sound of someone laughing at a private joke. If I meant to hurt you, don't you think it would have happened already? The wind picked up, whistling down the hollow street, and with it came the faintest sound wheels on asphalt. Daniel froze. The noise grew clearer, closer, the familiar rumble of an engine that should not have been anywhere near this dead stretch of road. He turned his head, dread crawling up his throat. At the far end of the street, headlights cut through the dark. Twin orbs of white light bore down slowly, steadily, the way a predator moves when it knows there is no need to rush. No, Daniel whispered. His legs tensed, preparing to run, but his body betrayed him, locking in place as though invisible wires held him upright. The vehicle rolled nearer, and the shape revealed itself. Not a bus, not anymore. Its body was too long, too narrow, the windows dark curtains of nothingness. The shine of chrome reflected distorted faces, mouths stretched open as though mid-scream, and above the windshield, where a route number should have been, there was only a single word painted in deep, bleeding black. Return. The girl leaned closer, her breath brushing Daniel's ear. They needed a driver, she said. Her tone was casual, conversational, as though explaining a simple errand. That was always the bargain, but I needed something else. His mouth went dry. What? Her friend widened. A date. Before he could react, she took his wrist again, and this time her grip was iron. Her fingers dug into his skin, impossibly strong for her small frame, and he felt a surge of cold travel up his arm, invading his veins. His breath hitched. He tried to wrench away, but the strength drained from his body as though she had siphoned it off with her touch. You don't have to be afraid, she murmured. It isn't as lonely as you think. You'll see. The headlights washed over them, and Daniel shut his eyes against the glare. When he opened them again, they were no longer on the street. They were inside. The bus or hearse, whatever it was, had swallowed him whole. The air was suffocating, thick with the scent of dust and earth, like the inside of a long-sealed crypt. The passengers lined the rows, all clad in black, their faces slack and expressionless. Yet their eyes turned to him, every single one, and the weight of their gaze pressed into his skull. The girl sat beside him, perfectly composed. There, she said softly. Isn't this better? Daniel's heart pounded so violently he thought it might tear itself apart. Let me go, he rasped. You're free to leave, she said almost gently. But then someone else must take your place. That's how it works. He scanned the passengers, their stillness unbearable. I don't want to. The driver's seat loomed ahead, empty. The wheel turned slowly, as if guided by unseen hands. The road outside the windows blurred into streaks of shadow, endless, directionless. The bus hummed with a steady rhythm, not mechanical but organic, like the heartbeat of a colossal beast. The girl leaned forward, her voice velvet smooth. Take the wheel. It's what you were chosen for. The others had their turn. Now it's yours. Daniel's body moved before his mind agreed. His legs carried him down the aisle, his shoes echoing hollowly on the metal floor. The passengers followed him with their eyes, silent, their mouths barely twitching as if on the verge of words that never came. He reached the driver's seat. His hands shook violently, but some deeper instinct guided them to the wheel. The moment his palms touched the surface, a shiver ran through him. It was cold, then hot, then neither, something beyond human sensation, like gripping the edge of reality itself. The girl's voice floated from behind him. See? It fits you perfectly. No, Daniel whispered. His reflection glimmered faintly in the windshield, and his stomach lurched. The face that stared back was not his own. The skin was pale, drained of color, the eyes ringed in shadow. His lips moved out of sync, forming words he did not speak. Panic surged. He wrenched his hands from the wheel, stumbling backward. This isn't real. This can't be real. The girl stood now, her figure luminous against the dark. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his chest. It's more real than anything you left behind. The bus lurched forward, accelerating into the abyss. Outside, the darkness opened like a mouth. Daniel felt himself sliding, as though gravity itself had tilted, dragging him toward the inevitable. He fought to hold on, clawing at the seat, the floor. Anything but everything melted beneath his grip. He looked back at the girl one last time. She was smiling, serene, her eyes glimmering with something ancient and inexorable. Thank you, she whispered. For the ride. The words sank into him like a final nail, and the world dissolved. When Daniel opened his eyes again, he was standing at a bus stop. The street was quiet, the night cool and calm. The city looked almost normal. People bustled past, oblivious. A bus approached, its headlights bright, its engine humming. Relief flooded him. He stepped forward, raising his hand. The bus slowed, doors opening with a hiss. He climbed inside. It was full, every seat taken by passengers in black. They turned their heads in unison, eyes fixed on him. Daniel froze. At the very front, behind the wheel, sat the girl. Her smile widened, and her hand lifted in a small wave. Welcome back, she said. The doors shut. The bus pulled away, and the city outside began to vanish. Story 6. The Chewed Arm. The rain had stopped sometime after midnight, but the house still hummed with the echo of it. Every gutter outside gurgled with water. Every surface inside felt faintly damp. The apartment smelled of wet plaster and soap and something faintly sour, the musk of milk that had spilled earlier in the evening and never quite been scrubbed away. She sat hunched over her laptop at the kitchen table, the glow of the screen the only light left on. Beyond the thin curtains, the street was hushed, the occasional hiss of passing tires a reminder that the world had not gone completely still. But inside the apartment, quiet was fragile, the kind of quiet that could be torn open at any moment. And it was. From the bedroom down the narrow hall came a cry, thin at first, then jagged, then swelling into the kind of sound that forced itself beneath her skin. She closed her eyes, hand hovering above the keyboard, then lowered it and pressed her palm to her temple. Please, just 10 more minutes, she thought. 10 more minutes to finish the report before her deadline strangled her in the morning. But the cry persisted, sharp and insistent. She rose, her chair scraping against the tile. Bare feet padded across the cool floor as she made her way to the bedroom. The boy was standing in his crib, just barely tall enough to peer over the rail, his tiny fists gripping the wood, his cheeks blotchy from tears. He looked at her with wet eyes, his lips quivering, a line of spit stringing from his chin. Shh, she whispered, lifting him gently. His body was warm, feverish against her arms. It's okay, baby. Mama's here. He burrowed into her shoulder, but the crying didn't stop. It dulled to a whimper, but every few seconds he gave a sharp, impatient wail, as though he were demanding something she hadn't yet figured out how to give. She carried him back into the kitchen. The laptop blinked on the table, cursor frozen mid-sentence, waiting for her. She shifted him on her hip and opened the fridge with one hand, retrieving a bottle, warmed it quickly, offered it. He drank for a moment, sucking fiercely, then pushed it away with a scowl, milk dripping down his chin. Not hungry? Then what is it? She murmured, brushing his hair back. His hair was dark and fine, clinging to his forehead with sweat. She kissed him lightly, tasting salt, but his fussing didn't fade. Instead, he twisted in her arms, small fingers searching, clutching. They found her left arm, her bare skin, and latched on. He pressed his mouth to it, sucking at the flesh like a desperate newborn, even though he was far past that stage. Hey, she said softly, trying to laugh. That's not for eating, but he persisted. His little teeth pressed against her skin, right at the place where an old scar curved pale across her forearm. It was a crescent, long-healed, the remnant of an accident she seldom thought about anymore. Yet the boy seemed to know it, as though drawn to it. His gums worried at it, and then, disturbingly, his teeth began to nip. Stop, she whispered. You'll hurt me. But he didn't stop. The suction deepened, the bites more insistent. She winced, shifting him away, but he squirmed, clawing back toward her arm with surprising force for his small body. His nails scraped, his mouth opening in a cry that sounded not hungry, not tired, but furious. A shiver ran through her. She rocked him, murmuring nonsense, trying to soothe. The cries dimmed to a whimper again, but his eyes didn't close. They fixed on her with an intensity she found herself unable to meet. For a second, just one, she thought she saw something in them. Not the soft brown innocence of her child, but something sharper, an expression too old for his tiny face. She swallowed hard. It's late, she whispered, pressing her cheek against his hair. We're both tired. Let's just rest. She carried him back to the bedroom, laid him down. He writhed, reaching for her arm again, but she tucked the blanket around him and slipped her hand free. His whimper rose, but she stroked his hair, humming, until his eyes fluttered. Back in the kitchen, she sat at the laptop, the screen glaring into her eyes. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but her mind wandered back to the feel of his teeth on her scar, the way he had bitten, not playfully but with purpose, with hunger. She shook her head, trying to clear it. Babies put everything in their mouths, she reminded herself. It's normal, teething, that's all. But as the cursor blinked, silent and patient, she heard a sound behind her, a wet, rhythmic sound. She turned, slowly, from down the hall. In the dark of the bedroom came the unmistakable sound of chewing. The sound was faint at first, muffled by walls, but in the silence of the apartment it carried a wet, grinding, smacking noise, like someone chewing on gristle. Her breath caught. He's asleep, she told herself, even as her pulse quickened. He must be dreaming, sucking his thumb. Maybe, that's all. But she knew it wasn't the sound of thumb sucking. She had spent enough nights listening to him soothe himself that she could tell the difference. This was wetter, slower, more deliberate. She pushed her chair back. It screeched softly against the tiles. She froze, listening, half expecting the sound to stop, as if it too had heard her. But it didn't. It went on. Chomp, smack, chomp. Her bare feet were cold against the linoleum as she stood. The hallway yawned ahead, darker than before. The door to his room was slightly ajar. She hesitated there, hand hovering inches from the knob. She didn't want to open it, didn't want to see, yet her body betrayed her, fingers curling around the wood, pushing it gently wider. The room smelled of milk and sweat and something coppery, faint but unmistakable, metallic. She swallowed against the taste that rose in her throat. Her son sat in the crib, blanket kicked aside. His back was to her, small shoulders hunched. His head bobbed faintly with the steady motion of his jaw. "Baby?" she whispered. He turned. For a moment, the shadows blurred his face. Then the light from the hall slipped across it. His lips and chin were slicked with red. Not a lot, just a smear, a shine. But enough for her stomach to twist. And then she saw his hand. The thumb was raw, wet at the tip where flesh had been gnawed through. A small line of blood trickled down his palm. "Oh God," she gasped, rushing forward. What did you do?" She grabbed his wrist, pulling it toward her, fumbling for something to press against the wound. He squirmed, protesting with a low growl that startled her. Babies cried, whimpered, screamed, but they didn't growl. "Stop it," she hissed, half to him, half to herself. She wrapped the hem of her shirt around his thumb, squeezing gently, trying to staunch the bleeding. His face contorted, mouth opening in a furious shriek that rose and rose until it rattled in her bones. "Shoo, shoo, shoo," she begged. "Please, baby, please." And then, suddenly, he stopped. The silence was worse than the screaming. He blinked up at her, eyes wide and wet. For an instant, he looked like her son again, scared, hurt, needing comfort. She sagged with relief, pulling him close. But as his face pressed against her arm, she felt it again. That pressure, that gnawing. Not against his own flesh now, but against hers. His mouth had found the scar again, lips sealing over it, teeth worrying at it with the same desperate hunger as before. She cried out, trying to pull back, but he clamped down, stronger this time. Pain flared sharp and hot, radiating from that thin crescent of old skin. "Stop it," she shouted, prying at his jaw. Her nails dug into his cheeks as she forced him away. He shrieked again, flailing, tiny hands clawing for her arm. She stumbled back, clutching him at arm's length. His face was contorted, twisted with rage, eyes blazing in the dim light. And in those eyes, she saw it again, something familiar. Not her child. Her breath caught. She knew that look. She had seen it before, on a different night, long ago, in the eyes of a man slumped on the bathroom floor, wrists open, lips pale. Her husband. Her dead husband. She staggered, nearly dropping the child. The memory clawed at her, fresh as blood, the way he had begged, voice hoarse, eyes hollow. "Please, please, just call someone." And the way she had stood there, frozen. Or maybe not frozen, maybe choosing. She couldn't remember which anymore, only that she hadn't called. The boy writhed in her grip, his face twisting, his mouth opening wider than it should have, teeth flashing small and sharp. And then he laughed, a soft, gurgling giggle, bubbling up through the blood smeared on his chin. She screamed. The sound tore itself from her throat, raw and jagged, as she shoved him back into the crib. He landed hard, blankets twisting around him, but he didn't cry. He only stared at her, giggling softly, thumb bleeding, eyes glittering. She stumbled backward out of the room, slamming the door shut, pressing her body against it as though to keep him inside. Her chest heaved, every breath tearing at her ribs. Her arm throbbed where he had bitten her, the scar burning as if it were fresh again. She lifted it, staring at the crescent mark, and for the first time she thought she saw teeth marks overlaying the old wound. She staggered back to the kitchen, clutching her arm, heart pounding in her ears. The apartment was silent now, the kind of silence that feels like it's waiting for something. And she thought, what if he isn't mine at all? She didn't sleep that night. The bedroom door stayed shut, but her body leaned against it until her legs gave out. Even then, she slid down to the floor, her back pressed hard against the wood, as though her son might somehow force it open. The thought was absurd. He was barely 18 months old. He couldn't even reach the handle. And yet she stayed, trembling, half expecting the knob to twitch beneath invisible fingers. The hours blurred. The shadows shifted across the hallway tiles. Somewhere inside, he stirred, whimpered, banged against the crib. At one point, she thought she heard him speaking words too muffled to catch, but too deliberate to be mere babbling. She pressed her hands to her ears and rocked until the sound passed. By dawn, exhaustion hollowed her out. Her eyes burned. Her scar ached, tender where his teeth had broken the skin. She peeled back the sleeve of her sweater and found a faint ring of bruising, as though his bite had left an echo. She told herself she'd imagined the rest. Children bit sometimes. Teething. Stress. Doctors had whole pamphlets about it. He was just unsettled. Maybe he felt her grief, the tension she carried through the apartment like a second skin. Babies absorb things, didn't they? Yes. That was all. She made breakfast in the kitchen with shaky hands, forcing herself to focus on the clatter of dishes, the hum of the kettle. When she finally went back into his room, he was standing in the crib, wide awake. His thumb was bandaged awkwardly from the night before, though crimson had already seeped through the gauze. He smiled when he saw her. For an instant she felt relief. A smile was a smile, wasn't it? Proof of innocence. proof of normalcy. But when she lifted him, his eyes met hers, and something in her stomach turned to ice. The way he looked at her, it wasn't a child's gaze. Too steady, too knowing. Her breath caught. She whispered, "Don't look at me like that." The words spilled out before she realized she'd spoken. He giggled, as though he understood. All morning, he clung to her, not the way babies usually clung, seeking warmth. Safety. This was different. His little hands kept crawling up her sleeve, pulling at the fabric, until his fingers brushed the scar. Whenever they did, his whole body seemed to shiver with a kind of shuddering delight. She tried everything to distract him. Toys, food, cartoons on the tablet. But his focus always returned to her arm, to that place just below the elbow where the crescent-shaped scar lay beneath her skin. By noon, she was trembling from holding him back. Finally, she strapped him into the high chair, desperate for a break. His bandaged thumb throbbed against the tray as he smacked it, red blooming across the white gauze. She mashed some bananas, spooning them toward his mouth. He turned his head, not away from food, but toward her arm, toward the scar. "No," she whispered, pulling back instinctively. "No, you're not," he screamed then, high and sharp, rattling the apartment walls. She dropped the spoon. The sound pierced straight through her skull, made her vision flare white. Her hand shook as she offered the bowl again, but his cries didn't stop until she lowered her arm within his reach. Then, just as suddenly as they began, they ceased. He reached out, patting the scar with his small palm. His face softened, his lips curling into a faint, almost dreamy smile. It wasn't the relief of a child comforted. It was hunger sated. She nearly gagged. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Every time she pulled away, he shrieked, throwing his head back so violently she thought he might break his neck. Every time she relented, letting his hand rest near the scar, he quieted instantly. It was unbearable. By evening, she couldn't take it anymore. She set him down in the crib, ignoring his protests, and fled to the bathroom. She locked the door and slid down against the tub, covering her face with trembling hands. She needed help. That much was clear. A doctor, a counselor, anyone. She reached for her phone only to realize she'd left it in the kitchen. Her reflection in the mirror caught her eye. The woman staring back looked unfamiliar. Sunken eyes, hair clinging to sweat-damp skin, lips pale and chapped. She looked like she hadn't slept in years. Maybe she hadn't. Not truly. Not since the night she found her husband slumped on the tiles. Her gaze drifted down to her arm, to the scar. The truth pressed on her chest, heavy and suffocating. That scar wasn't an accident. It was his parting gift. She remembered the night too well. His hand clamping on her wrist, knife grazing skin as he begged her, "Don't let me die. Please, call someone." His blood soaking into the floor. And her, frozen, or refusing. Which had it been? She still didn't know. She whispered to the mirror, "I didn't mean to." Her voice broke. But the bathroom was empty. No one to answer. Or so she thought. From the other side of the door came a sound. Not crying. Not laughter. Chewing. Wet. Steady. Chewing. Her stomach lurched. She pressed her palms to her ears, rocking like she had all night, whispering, "Stop it. Stop it. Stop it." But the sound didn't stop. When she finally opened the door, the hallway was silent again. The crib stood where it always had, the child inside watching her with wide, shining eyes. His thumb was no longer bandaged. The gauze lay shredded on the floor. He was sucking on the raw wound again, lips stained dark, teeth whirring at the skin, as though determined to strip it bare. And when she gasped, he smiled at her, blood glistening between his teeth. Her knees nearly gave out. That night, she locked her bedroom door. She curled in bed, clutching her arm tight against her chest, and tried not to listen to the chewing noises that drifted down the hallway. Tried not to think about how, beneath the sound of flesh being gnawed, she could almost hear a voice. A man's voice. "You let me starve." The third night was worse. By then, her body was running on little more than coffee and trembling nerves. Every sound in the apartment carried weight. The refrigerator's hum pulsed like a second heartbeat. The pipes rattled as though something crawled inside them. Even the shadows had grown thicker, gathering in corners, waiting. She told herself she wasn't losing her mind, that she was tired, that grief made people see things, that children bit their parents sometimes. She repeated these excuses until the words lost meaning, but the boy never stopped watching her. Everywhere she went, his eyes followed, unblinking, waiting, as if he knew something she did not, as if he remembered something she had tried to forget. At dinner, she caught herself staring too long at him. His small mouth opened and closed around pieces of food, and she heard chewing wet, deliberate, revolting. It filled her skull, louder than it should have been, drowning out the clink of the spoon. "Stop it," she muttered under her breath. The boy froze mid-bite, turning his head toward her. He smiled, lips shiny. Her stomach twisted. She shoved back from the table, muttering some excuse about cleaning, and escaped to the sink. She scrubbed the same plate over and over, until her knuckles ached, but the sound followed. Chew, chew, chew. She slammed the water off and spun around, but the boy was still at the table, calm, gnawing absently at the bandaged thumb as though nothing was wrong. Her throat burned. "Why are you doing this to me?" she whispered. Of course he didn't answer. He was too young. He couldn't speak. And yet, she swore she saw amusement flicker in his eyes. That was when she remembered her husband's last night, how he had looked at her, pleading, how his lips had trembled with words she could barely hear. "Don't let me die. Please, don't let me die." Her arm throbbed where the scar lay, a phantom pain, hot and insistent. She pressed her sleeve down over it, trying to hide it from his gaze. But the boy only giggled. Later, after she put him to bed, she sat in the living room with every light on. The TV played some old rerun, laugh tracks echoing in an empty room, but her attention wasn't on the screen. It was on the silence between those bursts of canned laughter. The silence was too heavy. She tried to read, tried to distract herself, but every page blurred. Every word seemed to carry echoes. "You let me starve." She closed the book and buried her face in her hands. "I can't do this," she whispered. It wasn't just exhaustion anymore. It wasn't just grief. Something was happening, something beyond her, and she had to choose, confront it, or pretend, until it consumed her. Her chest ached with the weight of indecision. She rose slowly, the apartment tilting around her. Her feet carried her toward his room before she could stop them. The door creaked open. Moonlight spilled across the crib. He was awake. Of course he was awake. He always seemed awake when she came. He was sitting there quietly, thumb pressed to his lips. Her heart clenched when she saw the bandage was gone again. His skin glistened wet, red seeping between his teeth. She stepped closer. Her breath shook. "Why?" Her voice cracked in the silence. "Why do you keep hurting yourself? What do you want from me?" The boy tilted his head, as though considering. His eyes gleamed in the moonlight, too sharp, too old. And then, slowly, he lifted his hand from his mouth. He held it out toward her. Her scar pulsed, burning under her skin. She cradled it instinctively, backing away. "No," she whispered. "You can't have it. Not again." The boy let out a sound then. Not a cry. Not laughter. Something in between a low, rattling chuckle that did not belong to a child. Her blood ran cold. She stumbled back, heart hammering. This wasn't normal. This wasn't exhaustion or stress. Something was inside her son. Something that knew her, that remembered her. And suddenly she saw it. The choice laid bare before her. She could flee, grab her keys, run out into the night, leave him behind, call someone, anyone, and never look back. Or she could stay, confront whatever had taken root in him, face the echo of her husband, face her own guilt, face the truth gnawing at the edges of her sanity. Her body wavered between door and crib. Run, stay, run, stay. Her scar throbbed harder, like a second heartbeat urging her toward him. The boy leaned against the crib rails, little hands gripping the wood, teeth glinting as he smiled wider. "Don't," she begged, though she wasn't sure who she was speaking to him, or the memory behind his eyes. "Please don't do this to me." His chuckle deepened, and then, impossibly, words slipped from his mouth. Not babbling, not imitation. Real words, heavy and hoarse, spoken in a voice she knew too well. "You never called." Her knees nearly buckled. The room spun, the air thinning as the weight of memory crushed her chest. Her husband's voice, from her baby's mouth. She staggered backward, hitting the wall, gasping like a drowning woman. "Run, stay, run, stay." But even as terror tore through her, She knew the truth. Running wouldn't save her. The voice would follow. The hunger would follow. The scar itself would follow. Her choice wasn't about escape anymore. It was about surrender. Her son or the thing inside him reached out once more, and she had to decide if she would give herself over to him or fight until there was nothing left. She stood frozen by the crib, the night air pressing heavy against her chest. The words still clung to the air, rough and low, more rasp than voice. You never called. Her baby's mouth had moved. Her baby's lips had formed the words, but the sound was wrong. It was too deep, too worn, too human, and she knew it. She knew that voice. Her legs trembled, threatening to give way. She pressed back against the wall for support, eyes fixed on the child. Her mind spun, desperately clawing for sense, for reason, for anything to make this fit. Children mimicked sounds, didn't they? That was all. He had heard her once, whispering to herself, repeating the guilt she carried. That had to be it. But her chest knew better. Her scar knew better. The boy smiled again, teeth glistening in the moonlight, lips smeared faintly red. He tilted his head, watching her with unnerving patience. Say it again, she whispered. Her voice cracked like dry wood. Go on. Say it again. For a long moment, there was only silence. Only his steady gaze, unwavering, unblinking. Then, as though indulging her, his mouth stretched wider, and he spoke. You let me starve. The sound slashed through her, familiar and final, sealing any hope of denial. It was her husband. Somehow, impossibly, it was him. Her hand shot to her mouth to muffle the cry tearing up her throat. She shook her head violently, whispering, No, 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 no. The boy giggled then, but the laugh didn't belong to a child. It was wet, broken, jagged. Her knees gave way. She slid down the wall, clutching her arm tight, fingers digging into the scar until her nails broke skin. The ache flared white-hot, as if his teeth were still sinking into her flesh. Her vision blurred with tears. She remembered everything. The night it happened, her husband bleeding on the bathroom floor, pale and shaking, the knife clattering away after he tried to carve his way out of himself, his hands clutching at hers, begging, Call someone, don't let me die. And her standing there, frozen. No, that wasn't true. Not frozen. She had chosen. She had chosen not to call. She had chosen silence. Because part of her was tired. Tired of his despair, tired of his need, tired of being consumed by his hunger for her attention, her care, her life. And so she let him bleed, let him fade. And when his eyes dimmed, when his hand finally slipped from hers, she thought she had felt relief. But that scar, the jagged crescent where he had clamped down in his final frenzy, never healed properly, because he never really left. Her son's giggle filled the room again, dragging her back to the present. She lifted her head, tears streaking her face, and saw him gnawing at his own hand once more, teeth grinding against flesh, eyes locked on hers. Stop, she screamed, surging forward. She grabbed his tiny wrist, prying his hand from his mouth, blood slicking her palm. Stop it, you'll hurt yourself. But the boy only stared, lips curving upward, teeth glinting with his own blood. And then he spoke again, voice rattling with hunger. I'm still hungry. Her stomach lurched. No, she whispered, shaking her head, clutching him tighter than she meant to. You're not him. You're not. You're my son. My son. But the boy leaned close, his breath warm and coppery against her ear. You're mine. Hagrip faltered. The room swayed around her, the shadows thickening, pressing closer. She staggered back, holding him at arm's length, desperate to see her child again. But all she saw was her husband's eyes staring out of that small, innocent face. She faced the choice, clear and stark now, surrender or resist. If she gave in, if she let him feed, maybe the hunger would stop. Maybe the voice would quiet. Maybe her guilt would finally be answered. But if she resisted, if she fought, what then? Could she kill her own son? Could she destroy the only piece of him she had left? Even if that piece was corrupted, even if it wasn't truly hers. Her breath came ragged, heart slamming. The boy reached for her arm. His tiny fingers brushed the scar, and fire seared through her body, dropping her to her knees. She screamed, trying to wrench free, but the pain only grew. The scar pulsed, throbbing, veins burning black around it. She looked down and saw his small hand digging into her skin, nails prying, teeth bared as he leaned forward, jaws opening wide. "No," she sobbed, shoving him back into the crib. He fell with a dull thud, but he didn't cry. He only laughed, rolling to his knees, eyes glowing faint in the dark. She stumbled for the door, hand on the knob, ready to run. But when she yanked it open, the hallway wasn't there. Instead, the bathroom stretched before her, frozen in time. The same tiles, the same pool of blood, the same knife glinting faintly under the light. Her husband lay on the floor again, staring up at her with empty eyes. His lips moved, and though no sound came, she heard the words inside her head. "You never called." She fell against the frame, shaking her head. "No, I can't do this. I can't go back." But when she looked down, it wasn't her husband lying there anymore. It was her son. His small body crumpled on the tiles, mouth smeared with blood, eyes glassy. Her breath tore out of her lungs. She dropped to her knees, reaching for him, only to freeze as his lips twitched upward, stretching into that same terrible smile. And then the voice came again, stronger, clearer, undeniable. "Feed me." She staggered back, her scar blazing so hot it felt like her arm would split open. She clutched it, nails digging deep, screaming as the pain reached a breaking point. The boy rose slowly, impossibly steady on his small legs, stepping toward her through the blood that wasn't there, eyes gleaming with a hunger that would never die. Her choice hovered before her like a blade. To give herself over, let him feed. Let the past consume her, or resist, even if it meant destroying what remained of her child, even if it meant carrying her guilt alone forever. The air pressed tighter, suffocating. The world spun. Her arm burned. The boy reached out again, and she knew she had to decide. She stood suspended in the doorway, the bathroom stretching ahead of her like a wound that refused to close. Her son, her husband, her mistake stood in the blood that wasn't there, hand reaching, eyes burning. Her scar blazed. Her lungs shuddered. And then she moved, not away, but toward him. She staggered forward, half dragged by the pull in her arm, half driven by a weary surrender. She dropped to her knees on the tiles that flickered between clean white and dark-stained red. She lifted her son into her lap, cradling him the way she had done so many nights before. He felt heavier now, denser, as though he carried the weight of both lives, the child she bore and the man she buried. Her lips trembled against his hair. "Fine," she whispered. "Take it. Take whatever you want. Just leave him. Leave my boy." The child stirred. His mouth brushed her skin, warm and damp. Then he turned his face to her arm, pressing his lips to the scar, teeth grazing the puckered flesh. She winced, breath catching, but she didn't pull away. "You want me? You want what I took from you?" Her voice cracked into something half hysterical. "Then take it. Eat me alive. Just give him back." For a moment there was only silence. His small body was still. His lips pressed lightly against her skin. Then he bit. The pain was instant, electric, ripping through her nerves like fire. She screamed, clutching him tighter, but still she didn't stop him. His teeth sank deep, deeper than a child's could, crunching through scar tissue, grinding into bone. Blood welled hot and fast, running down her wrist, dripping onto the tiles. She sobbed through the agony, rocking him against her chest. That's it, take it all, just give him back." But when she looked down through her tears, it wasn't her son nursing at her arm. It was her husband. His gaunt face pressed against her, lips slicked with blood, teeth tearing at her with a hunger that was bottomless. His eyes lifted to hers, dark with accusation and need. "You let me starve." Her scream tore the air, but his jaws only locked tighter, chewing, devouring. She clawed at his face, but her nails slid against skin that flickered between her son's softness and his hardened stubble. She tried to shove him away. He didn't move. Her strength failed. Her vision tunneled. The tiles shifted again. No longer the bathroom. No longer the nursery, somewhere in between. A place of peeling walls and shadows that bled. A place where no one lived. Where no one died. Where hunger stretched eternal. And in that place, she realized her mistake. There was no trade. No bargain. No him or the boy. There was only the hunger. Her body convulsed as he chewed deeper, tearing at muscle, sucking marrow. Her scream rose until it broke. until only a ragged moan remained. Still she clung to him, arms wrapped tight around the writhing weight that shifted between child and man, love and horror. Because if she let go, if she stopped, then there would be nothing left of either of them. Her scar split open, the old wound finally surrendering. She felt herself hollowing out, her blood pooling across the shifting tiles, the sound of chewing filling every corner of her skull. And then, suddenly silence. The weight in her arms stilled. She blinked through tears and haze, and saw her son looking up at her. Just her son, his cheeks flushed, his lips smeared crimson, his tiny teeth bright with her blood. He smiled sweet, innocent, almost shy. "Mama," he said softly. Her breath broke. Relief surged so violently it felt like her chest might split. She cupped his face with her trembling good hand, weeping openly. "Yes," she gasped. "Yes, baby. It's you. It's really you." He nuzzled into her, curling against her chest. He felt warm, alive, real. For a fleeting moment, she believed she had done it, that the sacrifice had worked, that she had saved him. But then, he opened his mouth again, and in her husband's ruined voice, he whispered, "Still hungry." Her body went rigid. Her hand froze on his cheek. He lifted his small head, eyes gleaming, smile stretching wider. His little fingers gripped her wounded arm, squeezing until fresh blood seeped between them. She tried to pull back, but she couldn't. She was too weak, and he was stronger now. Much stronger. Her breath hitched, panic clawing at her throat. "No, no, baby, please." But he only leaned forward, pressing his open mouth to her shoulder, teeth grazing fresh flesh. She realized then what the hunger truly was. It wasn't his. It wasn't her husband's. It was hers. All the years she had swallowed her resentment, her rage, her exhaustion burying it beneath duty, beneath care, beneath silence. All the nights she had stared at her husband and wished he would just stop. Stop needing, stop bleeding, stop taking. All the times she had wanted to consume him with her hate, to devour his weakness and make it vanish. She had fed it, and now it had come home, wearing the face of her child. The bite landed, sharp and final. His teeth sank into her shoulder, deeper this time, hungrier. She screamed, writhing, but he held fast, chewing with steady, awful patience. Blood streamed down her chest, soaking the boy's clothes, painting the tiles. Her vision darkened, her limbs numbed. But before the black closed in, she caught one last glimpse. Her son looking at her, his eyes calm and endless, his mouth smeared red, whispering words she couldn't unhear. "You'll never let me die again." The scream died in her throat. And then, nothing. Morning light broke through the curtains. The nursery looked quiet, untouched. A faint birdsong drifted through the window. The crib sat in the corner, soft blankets arranged neatly. A child's toy lay on the rug. The house breathed silence, as though nothing had happened at all. And yet, if anyone had stood close enough, listened hard enough, they might have heard it. From behind the crib, from somewhere deeper than walls or wood, came the faintest sound. Wet chewing, persistent, patient, eternal. Story 7. The room with no mirrors. He chose the room because of its promise, not because of the bed, the rent, or the strange, nameless landlord who handed him the keys without asking too many questions. He chose it because it was advertised with a curious phrase: mirror, proof, no reflective surfaces, no glint of glass to catch his wandering eye. A place where he might finally finish the book that had eaten the last 3 years of his life. The elevator shuddered as it carried him up, rattling like an old cage hoisted on frayed ropes. The corridor on the 7th floor smelled faintly of varnish and old smoke. And then there was the door, dull gray, number stenciled in uneven paint, a lock that turned with a reluctant grind. Inside, the air felt muted, not musty, not stale, just deliberately quiet, as if every corner had been muffled. The floorboards were dark wood, the walls white but uneven, like someone had painted over something rather than starting fresh. A desk sat in the middle, solid oak, with a chair tucked beneath it, a bed in the corner, thin mattress, curtains heavy enough to suffocate light, and indeed no mirrors, not on the closet door, not in the bathroom, not in the frame above the desk where a blank canvas hung instead of a reflective surface. Even the doorknob was dull metal, no shine. He stood there a long moment, testing the silence. Then he exhaled, a faint smile breaking his usual scowl. This could work. He sat up quickly. Laptop, stack of notebooks, pens that clicked too loudly in the hush, a small lamp. The story he had been forcing into life was waiting, crouched in his bones. He told himself he could finally trap it here. No distractions, no flickers at the edge of his vision. But the thing about silence, he discovered that first night, was that it made the smallest sound feel swollen. The scratch of pen on paper was almost violent. The rustle of turning a page echoed. When he chewed the end of his pencil, it sounded obscene. And sometimes when his mind drifted, he thought he heard a faint F intake, like someone else breathing, slow and patient. From the corners he couldn't quite see. He told himself it was the building. Old walls sigh, pipes murmur. But he kept glancing to the corners and finding nothing. The story he was writing, it was supposed to be about a man who invented a villain so terrible that the world bent around him. A creature half-dreamed, half-born. He called him the Other, a shadow that fed on being written about. The trouble was, the more he wrote, the harder it became to draw the line. The characters seemed to anticipate him. Sometimes he would write a line of dialogue, only to discover he'd already typed it days earlier in another notebook. Sometimes the phrasing appeared in his drafts without memory of his fingers moving across the keys. And always it was the same tone, low, patient, smiling in a way no human smile should. On the fifth night, he paused mid-sentence, hand cramping, eyes blurred. He flexed his fingers, rubbed his wrist, and as he looked up, he thought just for an instant he saw a shadow lean away from him in the corner of the room. Not move, not fade. Lean. When he blinked, it was gone. He tried not to think about reflections. That was the point, after all. But absence has a way of making the mind itch. He began to imagine the blankness filling itself in. When he brushed his teeth in the dull sink, he found himself straining to see water that was too flat, too black. Once, he lifted his phone to check the front-facing camera. The screen stayed dark, though he was certain the phone was on. He tapped the glass. For a fraction of a second, he thought he saw someone smiling there, not him, but close enough. Then the screen lit to its normal glow, and the moment was gone. He told himself he was tired. He told himself isolation always sharpened the mind to ghosts. Writers knew that better than anyone. Still, he began to leave the lamp on when he slept. And sometimes, in the amber glow, he woke to the sound of pen scratching paper, even when his hands were empty. He had learned, over the years, that distraction was his undoing. A stray reflection in a window, the shine of a spoon on a cafe table, the flicker of himself in the corner of his eye that was enough to unravel him. He would stare, lose track of words, watch himself twitch and blink and shift, and then hours were gone, and the page remained empty. So when he found the advertisement, a single line buried deep in the classifieds, he read it 3 times before he believed it. The mirror-proof room, for artists who cannot abide distractions. No reflective surfaces, no glint, no gleam, no echo of yourself. Perfect silence, weekly rent, cash only. He had laughed at the phrasing. It sounded more like a riddle than an offer. But something in him stirred. Hungry, desperate. The next day, he wired the money. The landlord was peculiar, but not hostile. A woman in her 60s, her hair coiled in a tight bun, eyes pale as glass. She didn't ask his name. She didn't ask what kind of art he made. She simply pressed the key into his hand and said, "Don't bring a mirror in." Not even by accident. He'd nodded, half amused, half uneasy. The elevator shuddered as it carried him to the 7th floor, its light buzzing faintly. The corridor smelled faintly of dust and varnish. Most doors were shut tight, unmarked. At the end, his door waited. A dull gray slab of wood with a number stenciled crookedly on the front. The lock turned with resistance, a grinding that suggested disuse. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. At once he understood the phrase, mirror-proof. It wasn't merely that there were no mirrors. It was that the room seemed allergic to reflection. The floorboards were scuffed dark wood, worn to a matte finish. The walls were painted in an uneven, chalky white, as though fresh gloss had been deliberately avoided. A bed crouched in the corner, a thin mattress on a wooden frame. A desk stood in the center with a chair tucked beneath it, heavy oak with no sheen. Curtains hung thick and heavy, swallowing the daylight. Even the doorknob was dull, brushed metal without polish. In the bathroom, the sink was porcelain, but cracked, roughened. The faucet had been filed until its shine was dulled. The tiles were chipped. There was no medicine cabinet, no shower glass, nothing that could offer a glimpse of him. The only thing on the wall above the desk was a blank canvas in a wooden frame, yellowed at the edges, empty. It hung where one might expect a mirror, but it offered nothing back. The silence pressed in, not stale, not foul, just deliberately quiet, like a throat holding its breath. He placed his bag on the bed and let the stillness wash over him. By nightfall, he had unpacked his notebooks, his pens, his battered laptop. He set them on the desk in neat order. He opened one notebook, clicked a pen, and began to write. At first, it was bliss. No flicker of himself, no twitch of a reflection to catch his attention. The room seemed to cradle him in its emptiness. Every sound he made was his own. The scratch of pen, the drag of breath, the shift of chair, but the silence magnified it. The scratch was loud. The rustle of paper was thunder. Even the faint click of his tongue against his teeth echoed. And once, only once, he thought he heard something that was not his. A faint intake, a soft, patient breath, just outside his field of vision. He looked up sharply. The corners of the room yawned back at him, blank and white. Nothing stirred. He bent back to his work. The story was supposed to be about a man who invents a villain, a figure half formed from words. He called him the Other. The character was not flesh, not shadow, but something in between, a hunger-given voice. But the problem was this. The more he wrote, the less he controlled it. Sentences arrived fully formed, as if whispered to him. Phrases appeared that he did not remember thinking. He would jot down dialogue, only to discover he had already typed it in another notebook, days earlier. And always the same tone, low, patient, a smile beneath the words. By the fourth night, he was keeping the lamp on long after midnight, unable to bear the room without light. The shadows in the corners seemed too thick, too knowing. His reflection was nowhere, but he felt as though someone, something watched with infinite patience, waiting for him to slip. On the fifth night, he paused mid-sentence. His hand ached. He set down the pen and rubbed his wrist. As his gaze drifted to the far wall, he swore he saw a shape shift, not move, not vanish, lean, as though a shadow had been standing just inside the corner of his sight, and had slowly withdrawn. He rose from the chair, breath shallow. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, yanking the curtain aside. Only the dark window stared back, but the glass, so faint, so dulled, seemed to quiver. He reached out, half expecting to feel warmth or cold breath, but it was only fabric, only night. He returned to the desk, unsettled. The absence of reflection began to gnaw at him. It was supposed to soothe him, to free him. But the longer he lived without seeing his own face, the stranger it became. When he brushed his teeth in the dull sink, he felt as though the water's surface should show him, but did not. He leaned close once, just to test it. The water only looked back as an abyss, black and flat, refusing to ripple. He pulled out his phone, opening the camera. The screen remained dark. He tapped it, shook it. For a split second so brief he nearly doubted it, he saw someone smiling there. Not him, not exactly, but near enough to freeze his lungs. Then the screen lit normally. His own face, pale and drawn, stared back. He laughed shakily, shutting the phone off. That night, he dreamed of writing, of pen scratching endlessly, even when his fingers cramped and bled. When he woke, the lamp still burned, and the notebook lay open on the desk. Words crawled across the page. Words he did not remember writing. You do not need mirrors. I'll reflect you instead. The days blurred. He stopped leaving the room except for food. Even that became a ritual of haste down the corridor, past the elevator, eyes averted from the faint gleam of the window at the end, always back, quickly, shutting the door before the silence could bleed out. The landlord never checked in. No neighbors knocked. He might have been alone on the whole floor, and yet the more he wrote, the less alone he felt. The corners of the room began to press at him. He avoided glancing sideways, for fear of catching a glimpse of something waiting. When he closed his eyes, he heard the scrape of pen, even if his own hands were empty. When he opened them, the page was fuller than he recalled. The figure of the other had grown teeth, a smile, a voice. It spoke in italics, slanted across the margins of his notes. Sometimes it addressed him directly. What are you hiding from if not yourself? Every page is a mirror, every word a reflection. He tore out the pages once, crumpling them, shoving them deep into the bin. But the next morning, the pages lay neatly stacked on the desk again, unwrinkled, waiting. On the seventh night, he told himself he was imagining it. He told himself fatigue was playing tricks. He told himself stories always threatened to spill from fiction into fever. But when he looked at the blank canvas above the desk, he saw just for an instant something shift. Not a painting, not a reflection, but a faint, glossy shimmer, like the surface of glass, like a mirror, waiting to wake. He woke on the seventh morning with the taste of metal in his mouth. The air was stale, like old breath trapped in fabric. He'd slept with the curtains closed, not because of the light they faced only the brick wall of the neighboring building, but because he hated the faint suggestion that the glass might hold his shape in it at certain angles. He hadn't noticed it before. But lately, when he shifted in bed, when his eyes weren't fully awake, he thought he saw a darker shadow peeling away from his body on the surface of the window, as though the glass tried to catch a reflection it wasn't supposed to hold. The apartment was designed for minimal distraction. He'd chosen it deliberately. No mirrors in the bathroom, no glossy tiles, no television screen. The computer monitor was matte black when off, and he made a habit of draping a cloth over it after working. A little ritual he hadn't needed before, but which now felt essential. A room that denied him vanity. A room where only words mattered. That had been the promise. But after a week, the words weren't his anymore. The novel had turned. He was supposed to be writing about a man who loved order, who drowned in his obsession with erasing imperfections. That was the seed of his antagonist, neatness that became cruelty. Yet somewhere in the quiet of this room, the antagonist had grown teeth. A grin he hadn't written, eyes he didn't recognize. When he wrote dialogue, it no longer felt like invention. It felt like transcription. On the eighth day, while his pen scratched across the page, he caught the faintest motion at the edge of his vision, a slither in the corner. He looked up sharply. Nothing. Only the wall, blank, cream-colored, too clean. Yet the sensation lingered, like someone had just drawn their hand across the edge of the paper when he wasn't looking. He laughed at himself, a short, broken laugh, and forced the pen back down. The villain's voice pressed louder in his head. "You can't see me if you don't want to." That wasn't his line. He hadn't thought of it, but there it was, bleeding through the ink. By nightfall, he began to notice how the walls of the apartment seemed subtly wrong. He had measured them before, with his eyes, but now when he paced from one end to the other, counting steps, the numbers never aligned. Sometimes it was 12, sometimes 15. He'd check again and again, furious at himself. The distance changed, or his memory did. Neither answer felt safe. That night, he lit a candle. He told himself it was for atmosphere, a nod to older times of writing. But the truth was, he wanted to see shadows. The overhead lamp was too clean, too sterile. Candlelight would show him if something moved. And it did. The flame bent toward the page. And when he looked at the wall beside his desk, he thought he saw two shadows where there should have been one. His hand cast a shape thin and angular, but there was another, broader, shoulders bent, head tilted, as though leaning close to read what he had written. He turned fast, but the air was empty. The candle guttered. He wrote until his knuckles ached, desperate to drown it out. The villain spoke more clearly now, whole paragraphs dictating themselves. He should have been proud productivity was a kind of miracle, yet he wasn't the author anymore. He was the stenographer, recording what already existed, and late in the night he swore the ink shifted as he watched. Words rippled faintly, letters bending into grins, then straightening again when he blinked. He tore the page out and crumpled it, but even in the wastebasket the paper seemed to twitch, as though something underneath tried to smooth it back open. On the ninth morning, the apartment no longer felt blank. He began to dread the surfaces, black, matte, supposedly safe. The stovetop in the kitchen gleamed faintly when polished. He avoided it. He ate quickly, staring at his plate. He caught his reflection once in the edge of a spoon and nearly dropped it. For the fraction of a second he saw his mouth smiling before he had smiled. That was when he realized. The absence of mirrors was not protection. It was confinement. Whoever had designed this place had stripped away reflective surfaces not to shield him, but to starve him, to make him hunger for the glimpse, to guarantee that when he finally found one, he would look too long. By evening, he couldn't resist testing the theory. He switched off the lamp. The apartment drowned in shadow. He set the candle on the desk and sat before the dark computer monitor. He had sworn never to do this, but his hand moved on its own, dragging the cloth away. At first, only the faintest suggestion appeared. The flame behind him glowed in the black surface, a trembling blur. He leaned forward. Slowly, his outline emerged, faint and colorless. But there was something wrong with the mouth. He wasn't smiling. He was biting his lip, yet the reflection smiled wide as though delighted. His chest tightened. He jerked his head to the side. The reflection didn't. It kept staring straight at him, teeth showing, candlelight flickering across gums too dark to be his own. He threw the cloth back over the monitor, heart hammering. For several minutes he sat in silence, palms damp. He tried to convince himself it was fatigue, eyes playing tricks, brain inventing horrors in absence of stimulation. But in the silence, a thought coiled, uninvited. You gave me a face. He didn't remember writing that, yet the line was on the page before him, ink still wet. The candle hissed low, drowning in its own wax. The room seemed smaller. He realized he hadn't opened the door in 2 days, or had it been longer. The story was writing itself. He was no longer sure if the page contained his words or instructions. His pen twitched, even when he tried to rest it. Something wanted to keep speaking. And every time he closed his eyes, he felt the grin waiting in the dark glass across the room. The second half of the candle burned quicker than the first, though he couldn't explain how. It shrank before his eyes, wax puddling thick around the wick, as though time accelerated when he blinked. He sat there in the half-dark, fingers pressed to his temples, wondering when exactly the air had grown so heavy. It was then he heard it, the faintest sound, a dry whisper. Not words, not yet, just the rasp of paper brushing paper. He turned. His manuscript lay open on the desk. A single page lifted and settled again. Though the window was shut, though the air was still, he told himself it was draft. He told himself nonsense. But as he leaned forward, he saw it. New words etched themselves slowly along the margin of the page, crooked and deliberate, as though a hand pressed down from underneath, carving through the paper's skin. You're not alone here. He froze. His pulse pounded in his throat. He wanted to tear the page free, burn it, but something stronger than fear kept him still, the same morbid fascination that makes a man peer over the edge of a cliff even as his stomach twists. He needed to see what came next, but nothing more appeared. Just those 4 words, leaning inward. Hungry. He slammed the notebook shut. The room answered with silence. He tried to distract himself with the simplest ritual, tea. The kettle boiled. He poured, careful not to look into the metal. But when he lifted the mug, the surface trembled, rippled by more than heat. For a second he swore he saw a face in the brown liquid, his, but paler, thinner, cheeks stretched by that impossible grin. The mug slipped from his hand, shattered on the floor. Tea bled into the cracks between tiles like veins filling. He left it there. That night, he dreamed he was inside the monitor's black screen. Not looking into it, but pressed behind it, palms flat against the glass. On the other side of the barrier sat a man who looked exactly like him, pen in hand, head bent. He tried to scream, to pound, but no sound reached. The only thing that moved was his reflection's mouth, curling into laughter that had no voice. He woke soaked in sweat, nails biting crescents into his palms. The room was still dark. He hadn't lit the candle, yet the monitor glowed faintly, as if it held its own dim light. He couldn't stay in bed. He rose, bare feet silent on the floorboards, and approached the desk. His manuscript lay open again, though he was sure he had shut it. A single line sprawled across the page, handwriting not his. You dream because I let you. His throat closed. He pressed the notebook shut again, hands shaking, then forced himself to sit. He tried to write something else, anything to reclaim control. He started a new page, but the pen dragged heavy, as though something resisted. His words came out wrong, slipping into rhythms he didn't recognize. He wrote, "The room does not end at the walls." He dropped the pen. The sentence looked back at him, alive, aware. He hadn't thought it. He hadn't meant it. Yet deep in his chest, he believed it. The corners of the apartment stretched when he stared too long. Shadows bent against geometry. Sometimes the ceiling seemed higher, sometimes lower. The doorframe pulsed faintly, like a mouth breathing. He tried not to look, but the knowledge festered. This was not a neutral room. It was a vessel, a trap shaped like minimalism. On the 10th day, he stopped trying to count time. The clock on his desk ticked irregularly, hands juddering backward when he blinked. He began writing through the night, through the morning, because stopping felt dangerous. If he left the pen still, he imagined another hand bigger, hungrier might pick it up. And always from the corner of his eye, he felt it leaning closer, a shape that had started as a reflection but no longer needed glass. By now, he avoided the monitor entirely, cloth draped like a veil. But sometimes, when he passed by, he heard the faintest sound from beneath the fabric. Tap, 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 fingertips against glass. He told himself not to lift it. He told himself he had the strength, but he also knew that strength was failing. One evening, he noticed something he hadn't before. The wastebasket, where he had thrown the crumpled page, was empty. The paper was gone. He hadn't taken it out. No one had entered, yet the basket was bare, hollow as a mouth that had already swallowed. The missing page haunted him. He felt sure it hadn't been destroyed. It was simply somewhere else, folded back into the manuscript, perhaps, or worse, waiting behind the dark monitor screen. That was when he began to hear the laughter. Faint, low, curling through the silence, like an echo from behind a door. Sometimes it was his voice, sometimes not, but always it came from nowhere visible. He whispered to himself to stay calm. He whispered until whispering became muttering, until muttering became frantic. He pressed his palms over his ears, yet the sound leaked through, thin as smoke. And in his notebook, new words appeared every time he blinked. You're writing me open. Every page is a window. Every word is a crack. He wanted to stop. He wanted to burn the whole thing. But the thought of destroying the manuscript filled him with terror deeper than the words themselves. Because if the story was the cage, then tearing it apart might set something free. The candle burned low again. He hadn't lit it, yet the wax bled anyway. His fingers trembled over the notebook. The last line written, whether by his hand or another's, stared up at him, glistening wet as though still alive. You've already seen me. He looked up, against every desperate instinct. The cloth had slipped from the monitor, fallen halfway to the floor. The screen was dark, but it was not empty. His reflection sat there, not moving, not breathing. And then, very slowly, its hand rose and tapped once, twice, 3 times against the inside of the glass. The silence after the tapping was heavier than the sound itself. He sat at the desk, lungs shallow, candle stub trembling in its pool of wax. Across from him, the monitor no longer pretended to be a machine. It was a surface, a window, a mouth, and in its depth, his reflection waited. It hadn't moved since the last knock. It stared with those familiar eyes stretched too wide, with that mouth that curved as though some private joke had ripened at last. The writer's own face, but wrong. Not reversed, not quite. A face that learned him too well. He told himself not to move, to keep breathing, slow and measured. If he treated it like glass, like an ordinary screen, it might fade back into nothing. But his pulse thudded louder, and the silence tightened. Then, almost delicately, the reflection lifted its hand again. The finger curled, then opened, a gesture of invitation. No, the writer whispered before he could stop himself. His voice cracked dry against the dark. You're not real. You're a trick of exhaustion. That's all. The reflection tilted its head, slowly, like a predator listening to a smaller animal fumble in the brush. On the desk, the notebook rustled. He didn't touch it, but the pages shifted, riffling themselves as though caught in invisible wind. It stopped on a fresh sheet. Ink bled up through the fibers, word by word, letter by letter, until a sentence lay plain before him. Ask me my name. His throat closed. He shoved the notebook away, but the words already etched into his mind, demanding shape. He tried to stand, to back away, but the air felt thick as water. His legs resisted. His body resisted. And before he could think better, his mouth betrayed him. What's your name? The reflection's smile widened. It leaned closer to the glass. Lips moved. But the sound did not come from the monitor. It came from everywhere else. From the floorboards, from the walls, from the hollow of the candle's flame. It said his name. Every syllable right, down to the soft hitch of breath he always made when nervous. Hearing it from the outside was like hearing his own obituary whispered. He stumbled backward, chair screeching. His heel struck the fallen mug on the floor, shards biting skin, but he hardly felt it. He wanted to bolt for the door, but something kept him, something worse than fear. The sense that if he turned his back, the reflection would move freely, step through without obstacle. I don't, his voice fractured. I don't want this. I didn't. The notebook turned another page, fluttering open on its own. Ink again, seeping like veins. You wrote me. You can't unwritten me. The reflection's hand pressed flat against the inside of the monitor. Pale. Wrong. Fingers tapping slow. Deliberate. He shook his head. You're just the character. A villain, nothing more. Your lines on a page. The reflection mimicked the shake of his head, but it didn't stop when he did. It kept shaking. Faster. Grotesque. Until its neck looked ready to snap. Then it froze. Smiled again. The room darkened, though the candle hadn't died. Shadows crept closer, sharp and angled, swallowing corners. The writer's own body felt thinner, smaller, as though he too were becoming only outline. His choices narrowed to two. Stay, keep writing, and maybe hold the reflection in its paper cage, or flee, abandon the work, and risk it following. The thought of leaving made his skin crawl. He pictured himself stepping into the hallway, only to see every glossy surface, every doorknob, every pane of glass turn black, waiting for the reflection's face. But staying meant surrendering the page. His hand itched for the pen. He told himself it was control, that if he wrote first, he could direct the story. But deep down, he knew whose hand really guided. The reflection tilted its head again, closer now, almost brushing the glass. Its eyes darted downward to the notebook, then back up to him. The message was clear. Write. He picked up the pen. His hand trembled. He pressed the tip to the page, desperate to write something defiant. You are nothing. You are fiction. But what came out instead was, I am waiting in the dark behind your eyes. He dropped the pen as if it burned. The reflection lifted its own hand and pinched the bridge of its nose in mockery, mimicking his posture, exaggerating it until the gesture looked alien. Then it grinned, mouth stretching wider than should have fit his face. Stop, he whispered. His voice cracked. I won't keep feeding you. But the notebook turned another page, as if rejecting him. New words formed without pen, without hand. Feed me, or I'll write myself in you. The candle guttered. The flame drew tall, bending toward the monitor like a flower turning to Sunday. His breath shortened, chest tight. He could hear his heart in his ears, and beneath it, something else, the faint rhythmic scratching of pen on paper. Though his hand was still, he realized with a sick lurch that the sound was coming from inside the monitor, from the other him, writing, faster and faster, the scratch of ink across endless pages. And as the reflection wrote, the room itself shivered. The walls flexed, corners stretched, doorframe pulsed as though alive. The choice pressed down harder than ever. Stay and keep it bound, or run and let it loose. He clenched his fists, nails breaking skin. His own voice, ragged, broke the silence. What happens if I don't choose? The reflection stilled. Then, slowly, it raised a finger to its lips in a gesture of silence. The notebook bled one final line that night. Then I choose. The words bled through the page like veins, curling across the notebook. Then I choose. For the first time, the writer felt his mind slip sideways. Not in thought, but in ownership. A sudden absence, like a hand prying loose his grip on himself. His vision swam. The room doubled, fractured at the edges, as though he stood between two worlds. This apartment, and the flat darkness behind the monitor. The reflection still sat there, grinning, writing furiously on a desk that looked just like his, with a notebook that fluttered at the edges. The scratching of its pen was so fast, so relentless. It felt like the sound could tear the air open. He staggered forward, gripping the edge of his own desk, notebook shoving against his wrist like something alive. He flipped it closed, hard. The pages bit at his skin, resisting, trying to stay open. No, he gasped, voice hoarse. You don't get to decide. The reflection froze mid-scratch. Slowly, it looked up, and for the first time, its smile faltered. The expression flickered, as though uncertain. It mouthed something. He couldn't hear it. He leaned closer. The words formed clear against the silent glass. "Let me out." He shook his head. "You're not real." His throat was raw. "You're ink and paper, a projection, nothing more." But even as he said it, he felt the lie sour in his mouth. The room itself seemed to shiver in disagreement. Shadows lengthened and bent toward the desk, toward the screen, as if pulled by gravity. He staggered back, heart hammering. His heel struck the broken mug again, cutting deeper, but the pain was distant. "I can't," he whispered. "If I let you out, there's nothing left. Nothing for me. Nothing for this room." The reflection tilted its head, mirroring the movement he made when doubting himself. Then it raised its hand, fingers splayed, pressing palm flat to the inside of the screen. And against every impossible law, he felt it. The cool press of glass yielding faintly under a hand that was not his. He gasped and yanked back. His own palm was damp, clammy. His skin bore the faint outline of another's touch. The notebook snapped open again, pages flaring as though a storm swept through. Letters carved themselves deep into the paper, deeper than ink should go. So deep the pages tore. "There is no story without me. There is no writer without me." His hands shook. He grabbed the pen, desperate to counter, to write over it, to take back control. But the moment he pressed tip to paper, his hand seized. The words that spilled weren't his. "You are the shadow. I am the man." "No!" he shouted, slamming the pen down. But the words etched themselves anyway, rising from the page like scars. The reflection began to stand, not on his side of the screen, but behind it. Yet somehow the movement made the room tremble. The desk groaned. The candle bent as though gravity had shifted. He lunged at the monitor, clutching both sides, shaking it violently. "You stay there. Do you hear me? You stay." "Huh?" The reflection leaned closer, its grin returning. Teeth sharper now, longer. The shadows stretched until the ceiling seemed infinite, the floor bottomless. His breath came fast, ragged, as though the air itself thinned. "You're not me," he whispered, desperate. "You're nothing without me." The reflection's lips moved again. This time he heard it, a sound that didn't come through his ears but straight into his skull. "Then let's switch." The monitor's surface rippled, blackness swirling like water. He staggered back, horrified. The room's walls pressed closer, then farther, geometry folding in impossible ways, until the entire space seemed like a funnel narrowing toward that screen. And he understood. The mirror-proof promise hadn't been advertising. It had been a warning. The room was not safe because it had no mirrors. The room was a cage built to keep reflections locked away. And by writing, by bleeding character into story, he had chipped at the bars until they bent. His legs trembled. Sweat soaked his back. The reflection reached out again, hand against the glass. It mouthed, clearly, perfectly. Choose. His options cut razor thin. He could keep fighting, keep writing, but the manuscript had already betrayed him. The pages belonged more to the reflection now than to him. Or he could step back, walk out the door, leave the room. But if he did, every reflective surface in the world might open, and he knew what would come through. It was his choice, his only choice, to become the page, or let the page devour the world. His knees buckled. He pressed his forehead against the desk, tears slicking wood. "Please," he whispered, to whom he didn't know. "Please, not me." The notebook turned itself one last time. The words rose in perfect script. "I'll make it easy. I'll write you in me." The monitor's surface rippled again, stretching outward like fabric, like skin. A hand pushed through, pale, wrong, dripping with black ink instead of blood. It reached, trembling, grasping the air between them. He staggered back, breath choking. But he didn't run, because somewhere deep, beneath all the terror, he knew the truth. This had always been the ending. He was not the writer. He was the written, and the reflection was ready to take his place. The hand pressed through the glass, slick with ink that dripped like tar onto his desk. Each drop hissed as it struck wood, burning tiny black pits that smoked faintly. The stench was sharp, metallic, like scorched copper. He stumbled back, but the hand kept reaching. its wrist now sliding free of the monitor. Veins of ink pulsed beneath its skin, writhing like worms. "No," he croaked. His own voice sounded small, papery. The notebook still lay open on the desk. The words writhed across the pages. One leaves, one remains. The room groaned, walls flexing inward like lungs exhaling. The air was suffocating, every breath heavy with the weight of something ancient, patient, inevitable. The reflection's other hand braced against the glass. Its face pressed close, the smile wider than his jaw should allow, splitting to the ears. Its eyes gleamed not with light but with hunger. "Choose," it said again, directly in his skull. His pulse roared in his ears. He thought of his life outside this room, half-empty coffee cups, a phone buzzing with unanswered messages, deadlines already missed. He thought of the manuscript he'd promised, the story he'd tried to finish, a story about a writer trapped in a room. It had been circling itself from the start. He realized that now. There was no outside life, not anymore. If there ever had been, he couldn't recall it clearly. Only this room, this desk, this screen. He staggered forward, grabbed the notebook with trembling hands. Pages fluttered violently, wind shrieking from nowhere. He pressed the pen down. His hand shook as he wrote, "I choose to stay." The words glowed, searing through the paper, through the desk, through his bones. For a heartbeat, he thought he had won, that by staying, he had locked the reflection where it belonged. But the reflection only grinned wider. It dragged itself halfway through, shoulders bursting free of the monitor, torso slick with streaming ink. The stench of burning filled the room as droplets hissed against the floor. He realized too late. The choice hadn't meant who stayed in the room. It had meant who stayed in the world. His body convulsed. Heat rippled through him, his vision tearing into white static. His skin crawled as though something were peeling it away. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed, devoured, sucked into the reflection's gaping grin. Then silence. When his vision cleared, he was no longer standing. He was sitting on the other side of the screen. The room looked different from here. Darker, vast and endless, walls stretching away into black. His desk was there, but it was only one among thousands, a sea of identical desks stretching out into infinity. Each one held a writer, hunched and pale, scribbling desperately into notebooks that bled. Their faces looked up, occasionally, and he saw horrified they were all versions of himself. He pressed his hands against the inside of the screen, pounding, screaming, but no sound left his throat. His movements were sluggish, dreamlike, as though pushing against syrup. The monitor glass held firm, and on the other side where he had been, the reflection stood, not dripping now, not twisted, clean, whole. It smiled faintly, his smile. It wiped its ink-stained hands on his jeans, then picked up the notebook. It turned to a fresh page and began to write. From inside the screen, he could read the words as they formed. The writer returned to his life. He was free. No one ever questioned what he had gone through. No one ever noticed the slight delay before his smile, the faint wrongness in his eyes. They only knew that he was writing again better than ever before. "No," he tried to shout, pounding the glass. His fists left no mark. The sea of other trapped selves raised their heads for a moment, eyes hollow with sympathy, then bent back to their endless pages. The reflection kept writing, page after page, his hands steady, confident. Each word erased more of the real him. He could feel his memories leaking out, ink spilling backward, as though his life itself was being redrafted. His last clear thought was not of escape or anger, but of grim recognition. This was the real story all along. He had not written it. He had been written into it. The reflection looked up one last time, and for the briefest instant, its smile faltered, not mocking, not cruel, something stranger, almost grateful. Then it closed the notebook, and the room with no mirrors was empty. Weeks later, an editor received a manuscript. The email had no explanation, no cover note, just a file attached. The name on the document was familiar, though the editor hadn't heard from that author in months. She opened it. The story inside was brilliant, chilling, intricate, a horror tale unlike anything she had read before. Its title was simple, The Room with No Mirrors. She shivered as she read the final line, glancing unconsciously at her darkened monitor. For a moment, she thought she saw a face there, but when she blinked, it was gone. You've heard them now, the 7 stories. Each a thread, each pulling toward the same dark place. Maybe you think they're finished, that closing this book, shutting off this voice, will leave them behind. But endings are only pauses. Stories don't die when the telling is over. They breathe in the quiet afterward, waiting in the corners of your room, in the glow of a darkened screen, in the shape of someone's shadow just out of sight. Tonight, you've carried them with you. Tomorrow, they'll be closer. And when you see something move in the corner of your eye, or hear your name whispered where no one stands, don't ask yourself if it's real. Ask yourself if it's one of them, waiting for the next chapter.